Now, he has another book that comes out, and it's called The Denial of Death. And it's all about how we as a society are conditioning ourselves to avoid talking about death, to just pushing it off, to being like, oh, no. Let's not talk about that. Let's put on Disney Plus and let's watch this very wholesome movie here. And we don't really understand. I mean, the one thing about life is that we are all going to experience death. Like, that is certain, you know, but while we're alive, we're doing everything we can to avoid it, you know, and in the end, it's not preparing us to handle that sort of aspect correctly.
What's up, guys? And thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. Before we start, this is a quick announcement to let you guys know that I'm dropping bonus episodes on Auxoro Premium. For the price of an iced coffee per month, you get 2 bonus episodes of my show, The Aux, every month that covers exciting, deep, and sometimes twisted topics like MK Ultra, the COVID lab leak hypothesis, Fight Club, dating, the obesity epidemic, ayahuasca, alien encounters, and more for less than $5 per month. In addition to 2 bonus episodes per month, you also get exclusive Ask Me Anything episodes, the ability to submit topic suggestions for the Aux and the Auxoro podcast, and access to all archived bonus episodes to binge at your leisure. Right now, there's over 25 hours of archived content, and it grows every month. For the best deal in premium podcasting, visit auxoro.supercast.com to sign up today. No topic off limits. That's Auxoro, AUXORO.supercast.com. Thank you for your support. And now, on to the episode. I am here with author and now friend.
Yes, best friend.
Best friend.
BFFL.
What's the best friend for life? Or is it best friend forever now?
BFFL, best friend for life, I believe. I like that. It's very romantic. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and so I'm going to go with that.
And speaking of romance, you presented me with a gift.
I did. Yes.
For
Christmas.
Before this podcast.
That's it. I knew Santa was going to bring it to you, but I figured I would be the first to bring it to you.
SPANK the CARP, now available in Barnes & Noble.
Yep.
Borders or just Barnes & Noble?
Barnes & Noble.
Fuck Borders.
Amazon. Yeah.
Fuck them.
Fuck them. Most bookstores, but honestly, Jeff Bezos is our daddy, and it's much cheaper on Amazon. So
100%. SPANK the CARP, fiction and poetry, 2020 anthology. That's where you can buy, or you can read Finn
Almost Buys a Goldfish.
Finn Almost Buys a Goldfish, which we talked about last time for people coming back. And this is in print here. And you also get some other stories too by worse authors, but still, I mean, you can suffer through that until you get to Finn Almost Buys a Goldfish.
It's great because you could read these other authors and you'd be like, wow, this sucks. I can be a writer.
Yeah.
You know?
It should be called I Almost Didn't Buy This Book because it has other stories besides Finn Almost Bought a Goldfish.
Yeah. Or maybe you could just call it Spank Me.
Spank Me,
you're just going to want to get spanked when you read this.
A BDSM / Chris Cooper.
There's a niche for that. I'm sure there is.
100%.
I'm open to exploring all sorts of avenues.
So yeah, I really do appreciate this. I'll put a link to this in the podcast called Spank the CARP, Fiction and Poetry 2020 Anthology. Pick it up there, support Chris, and fuck yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I do want to take this time, though, to thank everybody who participated in voting for me. Last time I was on the show, I was nominated for the Emerging Writers Award for Finn Almost Buys a Goldfish. And a month later, I was declared the winner, and the publisher exact words were that I received a zillion votes. So I felt very validated. I felt like the prettiest girl at the ball. Unfortunately, at midnight, everything will turn to shit. But, no, just kidding.
You are a very pretty girl. That's going to be the title of this episode.
Yes,
Chris Cooper, the prettiest girl.
I feel like I'm really blossoming right now.
While we're also thanking people, I want to take this time to thank Dave Robinson for making the trip up here. Yeah. Of course I'm joking because he didn't come.
Yeah, fuck Dave.
He hiked the Appalachian Trail. He did a 100-mile trek where he almost died. Came on the podcast and talked about it.
Yeah.
And then I told him, "Hey, do you want to come up for the podcast in mid-December when we're recording this.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh yeah, dude, fuck yeah, I just did the hardest trek of my life. Of course I'm going to come up. And then I said, it's with Chris Cooper, and he fucking clicked the phone and told me never to fucking talk to him again. Well, so I want to thank Dave for almost making the trip up here, just like Finn almost bought the Goldfish.
Yep. And so the reason Dave didn't want to come up here is because I actually did the 101 mile trek, and he wasn't able to go that extra 1 mile. And but you know, he can try it next time. He can.
And you did the 101 mile trek. This is in 1999. So you were like,
I was like 10.
Yeah.
So
and you didn't even realize you were trekking. You just went for a walk.
And I hunted my own animals, and I caught my own fish, and I pretty much, you know, I was like full blown nomad out there, and I didn't even realize it. And you know, so I feel bad that Dave really had ambitions for going out there, and maybe next time he'll surpass my 101 days. But you know, something to look forward to.
Maybe next time, and you have to weight it for the future, the weighted average, because of course you did do it when you were 10 years old.
Exactly.
And so that's like 1,000 miles.
Oh, absolutely.
Today.
Yeah. So pretty much what we're saying is Dave sucks. You know,
I wanted to be the one to say that. I'm so pissed you beat me to the bullet, but I just keep having Dave Robinson back on the podcast because he's so good that he's bad. He's so good on podcasts that it's just he just makes me feel so good every time I talk to him.
He's very loquacious, and he's very agreeable, and he gives you that positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't think he's ever used the sauna that's behind him in the YouTube videos. I think it's fake.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it could be clever Photoshop, but no,
it's a Zoom background.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
he has a sauna that's a Zoom background every time we do the podcast.
And he just happens to be naked and in his home and does that.
Alternating flexing the pecs for an hour and a half straight, which I appreciate. I mean, I love getting blood flow to other places besides my brain, so
exactly
it helps me focus during the podcast. You don't want too much blood in the head.
No, that's always a bad thing.
Yeah,
you know. But in all honesty, though, Dave, I love you, dude. Best friend since college. Only real true friend that stood by me when I was a complete psychopath. So I can't not say that. Like, I got to give him a shout out. And when we talk about Bleed, part of Bleed was inspired by an incident that occurred in college with Dave.
Yes, let's get into Bleed. That's literally the first thing that I have.
Let's fucking do it.
On my notes.
Fucking.
So what was this incident in college? what moved you to write Bleed? What was the experience that inspired this story?
So before I kind of delineate on that whole experience of crafting the story, I wanted to kind of talk about this past year, and then it will make a little more sense of where the creativity and the catalyst for this story originated from.
Yeah, take us back.
So I appeared December last year on this podcast, and I was nominated for the Emerging Writers Award for Finn Almost Buys Goldfish. The following month, I won the Finn Almost Buys Goldfish Award for the Emerging Writers Award. And I think I briefly alluded to that I was going to work on my novel. And my novel right now is pretty much done. I just have to tighten up the last chapter. But I spent, from my last appearance until May or July, just diving into this story. And it's much different than a short story, because a short story, you have a few pages and it's over once you reach the conclusion. It's not something you entirely have to develop with characters, their progression. There's a lot of dynamics. You've got to remember shit that happened in the plot to make sure it adds up in the future. So I found myself really kind of, and not to be purporting the tired, tortured artist sort of trope, but this novel is 100% a psychological experiment into the human condition. And we could get more into that later on, but it was kind of bringing me into this, like I was getting completely consumed by writing this story. And this past year, I only really put out a poem. My first poem was called Sun and Rain. And it was pretty much a commentary on how, sun and rain kind of is synonymous with pain and pleasure, happiness and sadness. And it was kind of a juxtaposition of how we're always playing off those two emotions and how we've been conditioned to prioritize happiness since a young age. And it's a very short poem. And in the end, it just says, you can't really know what happiness is without pain. You don't know how good the sun is without the rain. Mm-hmm. And that was like that whole idea. And I was giving like these little sort of microfiction poetry dabs that were inspired by the work I was writing on. And then around April, I really started diving back into philosophy, a lot of nihilism, a lot of existentialism. Friedrich Nietzsche, I was reading a lot of his work. And I was really just engulfed in my work into the psychological elements of it. And it's very dark. Obviously, it's going to deal with like suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, things like that. And I found that the more I was writing, the more it was reflecting onto me. I started feeling like dark, depressive, just like really just really into that place that you don't want to go in your subconscious. And to play off of that, I was getting a lot of success. Like this past year has been momentous for my writing career. It just started out as a hobby, and then I started throwing out publishing, short stories. My fiction novel, Fix It Broken, didn't get published. So I was just like, all right, let me try fiction short stories. And now like, to see that I have like a following and I have like this eclectic sort of group that's comments on my stories and interacts with me. And I'll wake up one day and somebody will be in Barnes and Noble and they'll tag me and they're reading one of my short stories. It's just like,
there's a couple comment threads on your stories where you would think it's a Facebook family political argument. Like that's how many comments. It's like you see someone post something that has something to do with politics and whatever, like that one family member that voted for Trump, and then that gets 75 comments underneath of people giving their takes.
Yep.
That's how many people have commented on some of the stories that you've written. It's evoking very emotional, sharp responses from readers, which is a great thing because you write about such vivid emotional things that people experience. So they're either gonna have they're gonna react strongly to it, and they do that in the comments.
And honestly, as I write it, I'm trying to be a provocateur. Like I'm trying to provoke people to respond, to either get happy about it, to get pissed off at it. Like I want to evoke emotion. That's what I'm trying to do to you. And whether it's something you agree with or something you don't agree with, I kind of pick apart your human psyche. I know things that will get people going, that will cause or elicit a reaction, and that's stuff that I focus on going forward. But with this like group of people that are always commenting and sharing my stuff, like it's been transcendent as a writer's standing point to know that I have a following that's constantly waiting for something to come out. But at the same time, I noticed this past year the negative component of that, where I started to kind of lose myself a little bit, where I'm like, oh, I'm getting mild success. Like I'm getting money from Barnes and Noble. I'm getting it from Amazon. Like I'm getting paid for these short stories and I'm winning an award. And now I'm feeling like, okay, now I have expectations. Now I have to have a deadline. Now I need to get something out by June. And then I got to get something out by November. And I'm like, I find myself forcing myself to write, and the stuff I'm writing about, I'm just like, this is kind of bullshit. Like, well,
Yeah. I hear a lot of stand-up comics talk about that, where you have your entire life to get out your first good 5 minutes or your first good special. Mm-hmm. And then once people like it, like once it pops, then that starts the clock on you having to put out something once every 6 months or once a year. You can't sit back and take 5 years and like people do. Frank Ocean, I don't know if you listen to Frank Ocean, but he basically puts out an album and then he'll disappear for 4 or 5 years and then come back. And part of me thinks that's the way to do it. Just give people what they want and then disappear, go live your life, and then come back. But again, I'm also addicted to putting content out for good or bad.
You're a creator.
Yeah.
And that's what gives you that validation, and philosophy will advocate for that. Like, that is the biggest way to combat existential negativity, nihilism, is to create. So I totally understand that. But for me, like, this was so much fun. Writing for me was always fun. And then I'm slowly starting to realize this is turning into a fucking job. And I'm like, this is not good. I'm like, this is not good for me mentally, and it's not good for me creativity wise. So I took a break from trying to write. Like, last year I had 3 stories out. This year Bleed was my only short story. And I took a break from my novel to dive into Bleed. And it's a 1,600 word short story. And it's something that came out just completely natural. And to kind of put together the pieces of how this fusion came together. So Dave Robinson, we were roommates for 4 years of college. And our senior year, I can't remember if it was during an exam week or what was going on, but we were living in a condo and somebody had a package delivered. And there was a cardboard box that, we were so fucking lazy. We didn't get rid of anything, any garbage, recycle. We just left that shit there. And there was this big box on our table, and we would come in from class or from whenever, and we'd pick up a knife and we'd just go pop, 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 like real visceral, instinctual aggression. Yeah. And like the give of it, the popping, like it was the best sort of feeling. It's that transitory relief of aggression.
Yeah, therapeutic.
Absolutely. It was completely cathartic. And we would do that for the whole week. And then one night Dave came home, and I forget what happened, but he was super pissed, super perturbed. And he picked up the knife and he stabbed the box. He went back to stab it again, and he hit the table. And when he hit the table, his hand slid all the way down the knife, and he just like lacerated his fingers.
This was Dave?
Dave Robinson.
God damn.
And he was just like, oh, fuck. And we're like, what's going on? Like show us your hand. They're like, no. And he like went over to the sink, and he was running his hand under water, and he's like, oh, no, it's going to be fine. I'm like, well, did you look at it? He's like, not yet. And then I can see him. He's visually perspiring, like just perspiration pouring from him, and he's like blinking slowly, like heavy eyelids, and he's in front of the sink. We're like, dude, show us your hand. Right? And he shows us his hand, and you could see his fucking tendons, his bone.
Oh my
and we're
God.
Like, don't panic, but we have got to get you to the hospital.
Yeah.
And he wound up getting like something like ridiculous, like 50 stitches.
Don't worry, but call an ambulance.
So
you're like, Dave, you're not going to die. And you're looking to your other friend. You're like, you might die.
I've never seen something like that before. I was like, holy fucking shit.
Yeah. Calling a priest. Like, no, Dave, the priest always comes to see people in the hospital. This isn't a bad thing.
I wish I knew that now. I totally would have fucked with him. I'd be like, dude, you're going to die.
Yeah.
We're going to have to cut your whole hand off. Your arm, that's gone, man.
So just complete laceration
just
through
like
the tendons,
right down
bone. Like
it was like fucking Terminator 2. He shows that. It was just like, oh fuck.
I feel like it's almost worse to see it because it makes it real. Because I've had injuries in the past. I had a gash in my thigh once where it wasn't all the way to the tendons or anything, but it was worse than it felt.
It
was deeper than it felt, and probably should have gotten stitches. Ended up just taking care of it on my own, and it was fine. Didn't get infected. I was lucky. But I looked at it, and then it made the pain get worse because it made it real. It felt like maybe it was a centimeter, not even deep. And then I saw it, and it looked like it was an inch in there. I was like, oh my fucking God, I'm in pain now. Oh, fuck. So it's like you almost don't even want to look. Yeah.
Will exacerbate any sort of condition. So that instance happened like a decade ago. So I stored that in my hippocampus, my memory box for later, because I'm like, that's a fucking gem of a story to tell. And then last year, the other piece to this puzzle, I was in my kitchen and I was super stressed just from doing a lot of freelance work. My full-time job sucks because it was just like I was writing about shit I don't want to write about. I was writing about like plush rugs and home decor accents and composite wooden nightstands and just all that vacuous shit.
Just life-filling, riveting topics.
Yeah, just fucking Edward Norton.
Like Martha Stewart porno.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like rugs with plush high piles.
God.
They're great. They're super soft underneath your foot. Like
making housewives come across
absolutely,
the country.
Man.
Just
like
description.
Fucking, if you don't have a Sherpa blanket, you better fucking get your shit together by now.
I'm gonna get me some.
So anyway, I just had one of those days, and it was just the last drop in the metaphorical bucket of neurosis, where I'm trying to open my kitchen drawer, and it's the timeless tale of it's fucking stuck on something, right? And I'm just in no fucking mood, and I'm yanking it, and I just lose it, and I just reach into the back of the drawer, and I grab whatever the fuck is there, and it's a serrated knife, and I cut my finger, right? And it pisses me off to even further end. Not that it hurts, but pull it out, my hand's covered in blood, and it's not a bad cut whatsoever. It's just that, that tedious sort of cut where it just doesn't stop bleeding, and it's just pulling. So that drawer is right there. I'm next to the sink, and I'm running my finger down this and with the faucet, just right here, just like this. And before I know it, I'm in this like nebulous sort of state where I'm just transfixed on the water cascading onto my hand, and it's pouring into the basin of the sink, and the blood is splattering there. It was like the soothing sort of acoustics. It was just so fucking trippy. And I'm just sitting there watching it, that just my hand would be red, covered in blood, and then wash away. Then it'd replenish, wash away, replenish, wash away. And I was just completely paralyzed. And I'm taking in the sensations, the sounds, the sights. I'm inspecting the hand soap that's on the counter there. And before I know it, like my thoughts start metaphorically bleeding. And I'm just like, what am I doing? Like with my life? Like, am I satisfied where I'm at? Like, what's my life going to look like in 10 years? Like, who's going to be around here? Like, what job am I going to have? Like, and like, it was just a torrential downpour of just disturbing thoughts, and not so much disturbing, but just this rumination, constant wondering. And in that moment, I felt like I was outside of my body, and it was like 30 minutes of me just standing in front of my sink, like fixated on this fucking cut.
Like in a meditative state almost.
Yeah. And in that moment, I'm like, I need to do something with this in a story. So I jotted that down. Like my notepad on my phone is full of just like fragments of ideas that I want to kind of touch upon. And so May came around, and most of my audience is reaching out to me. They're like, when's your next short story? When's your novel coming out? When's this and that? And like, it was starting to fuck with me a little bit, because I had put out a lot of short stories before. I did a poem. I did this micro fiction about shoes, and it's like 50 words, and it's about how your choices all lead you through your life. Obviously there's extenuating circumstances where things happen around you that you can't control, but the majority of your life and your culmination of your life is led by the choices that you make throughout it. So that was another piece I did, but people were just fucking like banging on my door, like not banging on my door, but pounding on my direct messages on Instagram.
Literally fans outside in your yard, pounding on your door. Open the fuck up! Give me the next story, and your family will be okay.
But like,
so that's great. You have such a close and emotionally tied fan base.
But
to
it's
your work.
close. But I don't really know these people.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people,
but they know you.
Well, I've had like several people with blue check marks reach out to me about anxiety. Like, saw your episode, like, and then thinking I'm like a psychologist and I can diagnose them. Can you help me through a panic attack? And I'm like, I can give you advice, but I'm like, I'm not a fucking doctor,
Yeah.
So I was getting, so what I'm trying to say is that there was a dichotomy of emotions last year. On one hand, I was getting this mild success. I was getting a great following, but then I felt like I had this self-applied pressure. And it kind of came to a head with this story, Bleed, that I put together. And the title of the story, Bleed, is a nod to Ernest Hemingway. One of his most iconic quotes is on writing, and there's nothing to writing. All you have to do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. And so I pretty much did that. And obviously it wasn't a typewriter, it was a contemporary typewriter. It was my laptop. And I sat down and I went right into it. And the one thing I love about this story is there are many layers to it. You could read it at the surface layer for what it is, or you can examine the symbolism, the references to philosophy. And that's what really, I think, made a big impression for the outlets that are featuring it and want to reprint it and put it in bookstores.
May I read the intro?
Absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Just to give people a little taste.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bleed by Chris Cooper. Kevin has cut his hand, and it's really bleeding, pooling into the sink as the water cascades onto his fingers from the kitchen faucet. He's not panicked, though. It's just stinging as he holds it underneath the spout. The rapids rush, masking the sides of his fingers, and he can barely see the wound, just the streaks of red that ruddle the water. It's rather mesmerizing, though, watching the water pass, millions of harmonized droplets falling at once, synchronizing as it pours, and Kevin forgets he's even wounded for a moment.
Yeah. That's the
powerful.
And it's one of those stories that doesn't have a buildup. It brings you right into the action, and the entire story takes place in one spot in front of his kitchen sink. And to kind of dive into the symbolism of it is he's bleeding, right, physically, but that's not where the pain is coming from. The pain is coming internally. He's bleeding figuratively. And the worst kind of pain isn't the pain that is on the outside. It's not a bruise. It's not a black and blue. It's not a laceration per se. It's internally. It's in your heart. It's in your mind. And I wanted to juxtapose these two elements where, yes, he's bleeding figuratively, but that's not really where the issue is at. It's his internal trauma that is bleeding. It's pouring through. So the rest of the story, he's got his hand cut, but you come to learn that he's dealing with a divorce from a year now. He's learned that his wife that he was married to, they didn't have children together, and now he just found out that she had her first child. Like these really poignant aspects of someone's life that you can repress for so long until it just starts to bleed.
Yeah, and I love the way that it started right in the middle of the action. Like there's no buildup. It's just, if it was a movie, you feel like you just come in and you see the guy holding his hand in the sink, and you feel what's happening, even though you don't know why at first. All you know is the physical, and then you find out the emotional elements that went into it later. But I love the way it kind of zoomed in on this snapshot really quickly, and then it zoomed out throughout the story. It's like almost like the opposite approach, where it's like start just in the middle of the action, and then explain some of the things that went on later.
And so when you progress through the story, you'll see a lot of juxtapositions of physical like ways of applying care and bandages next to emotional ways of protecting yourself. So he's taken his hand and he's swathed it in a bundle of paper towels, and he's not ready to look at it yet, just like his subconscious, because at the end of the day, we have a subconscious that is stored with trauma and issues and conflicts that we tend to avoid. And all of this story, all of the actions in this story are pretty much metaphors for depression and anxiety and how we go through our day, how we deal with those sort of things. And one of the aspects in the story he talks about is that he's still transfixed on the vibrant color of his blood, and it elicits a memory of his mother and father's matching Christmas sweaters, and that elicits a deeper sense of nostalgia, which hurts even more than his actual cut.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the things that I wrote down after I read the story for probably the fifth or sixth time, because I went through it a bunch of times before this podcast, and it's similar to what you were saying about 2 minutes ago, but I wrote down that Kevin was bleeding out emotionally, and the physical was the final stage.
Exactly.
And I thought in my head that there are people that bleed out all the time emotionally, but we don't stop on the sidewalk because it's not a physical cut.
That's exactly
like someone that is about to go into a building and press the 45th floor in the elevator and go jump off the building. When you pass that person on the street, there's no signs of emotional bleeding and emotional scarring. Someone that had just got the shit kicked out of them by their boyfriend walking down the sidewalk, you don't see, unless there's some sort of black eye or something, there's nothing physical that says that this person is going through extreme anxiety and extreme depression and extreme emotional bleeding on a daily basis. But if someone just got shot in the stomach and they're walking down the sidewalk like, help me, there's going to be 20 people that come over. And hopefully today, and because some people will just film it and watch the person.
I know. Nowadays.
But like most people will at least call the cops. Like someone will go over and apply pressure.
You hope
And because you see the physical bleeding, you see, if someone, a construction worker at a construction site fucking cuts his hand off and he's like, oh fuck, like everyone else on the construction site's gonna go over and assist that person. But if someone just got destroyed by a breakup and doesn't want to live the next day, there's no sign
There's no
for
physical
you to enter their
indication.
world. There's no portal of blood there's no portal of suffering. Or there is, but it's not obvious unless you talk to the person.
And if you could get an introspection, if you could take a visual light to see what kind of damage they have on the inside, you would probably be like, holy shit, like you need some help.
You probably stop people. If there was, and there may be some sort of emotional spectrum that we can't pick up as human beings. Like maybe there's some sort of emotional aura that connects us all can be visually picked up, but we just don't have the technology to do that yet. But if you saw someone walking down the street and they were bleeding, but it wasn't a physical injury, it was like something depressive, or maybe they're having a panic attack, and you picked it up in your vision. Maybe they're like they just turned black or something, and we have the technology in the future to see them. You could go over that person and say like, hey, I see you're having a panic attack.
Yep.
I just want to let you know, if I can talk to you for a few minutes before I go to the coffee shop. Like if you want to talk, like I'll just talk about whatever. You could just listen if you want. Or if you saw someone, like different things you could pick up in the visual spectrum that signal emotional suffering, so that you could go over and help someone like they just got shot or they
but that
got an
shit
injury.
takes time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have to care to a deeper level. You have to ask, you have to prod and read up on their nonverbal communication, their body language. And it's so much easier when there's a cut. You can identify it. This is what's hurting me. This is what's bothering me. When it comes to mental illness, you can't always point to it, and that's what makes it so fucking deadly. And it's something that people need to start recognizing. And it's not like, I've had people reach out to me and they're just like, this is so cool, man. Like, I love this cool dark shit. And I'm like, yeah, like that's cool and all, but like I'm not trying to make it cool. Like I'm just trying to show you how authentic this is. I'm trying to shed light on what it's like, Yeah. And I could have wrote this story without him being cut, but it's not going to transfer. It's not going to resonate the same way.
Because we're so visual. We're such visual creatures. If something doesn't matter,
he's not cut, he's not hurt, he's fine.
Yeah. And we do that with ourselves too. If we go through a breakup, if we, lose a parent, you can push down that shit emotionally because there's nothing physical bleeding out of you. There's no, you can convince yourself that you don't need any sort of medical or psychological attention because you look at yourself in the mirror and you're fine, but you know something's wrong on the inside.
I know. And that's the worst kind of pain. I feel like if you can't identify where it's coming from, it's something you feel like you can't fix it. I feel like there's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There, maybe in the future, there'll be some sort of emotional EMT service where if someone's if there's some sort of aura or signal you could pick up from people that are going to harm themselves, or maybe they just are so emotionally down that they're in a very unstable state. If you could just apply a bandage before they get the help that they need, like, because it takes years and years, like you said, kind of like if someone got shot on the street and you could apply pressure until the real doctors showed up, and then they'd have to sew up the wound and heal it. You maybe talk to that person for 5 minutes, and then maybe that day they don't hurt themselves or they don't kill themselves, then you never know what that could spiral up into.
But the difference between that is like, you see a gunshot wound. Okay, I've got to put pressure on the wound. I got to make sure he doesn't bleed out. Like, it's procedural. When it comes to a mental health issue, there's no one size fits all. It requires a lot more extensive sort of involvement, you know? And I feel like unless you're an empath, unless you're somebody that's compassionate, you're not going to really be able to help somebody. And I'm not trying to diminish, you know, these clinics that are, you know, psychologists or psychiatrists, but, you know, I've been to at least 10, and it's really tough when you're in that mindset. You want to feel like you can identify with somebody. You want to feel like you have a connection with somebody. And most of the time, these fuckers are just doing their jobs, you know? And that's what makes it even harder, is because if you don't feel that safe, like if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the number one need is that sense of feeling safe. Yeah. Or it might even be the second one, but it's like that the physiological, you need the water, you need food, but the second one is that safety, that shelter.
Yeah. Well, I think you can have procedural flexibility when you encounter someone that's either in maybe a highly depressed state or a highly anxious state, where you can have a basic procedure and then have wiggle room within that procedure, depending on how that man or woman presents themselves. And even medically, sometimes you'll have to improvise on the fly, performing a surgery. Some things aren't always cookie cutter. I was listening to Tim Ferriss on Ari Shafir's podcast, Skeptic Tank, and I've listened to a bunch of Tim Ferriss episodes where he's been the host on the Tim Ferriss show. This is the first time I've ever listened to him be interviewed, and Ari Shafir is much less methodical with his interview approach. Just talks to people. He's a stand-up comedian, great comedian, and he's kind of just it doesn't seem like he has a plan. He just goes with the flow. And they got into this whole discussion about Tim Ferriss at Burning Man, and he volunteered, Tim did, to help people get through anxiety attacks, whether they were on drugs or not on drugs. Yeah. And he was describing these procedures that you could use to de-escalate a highly anxious state. So one of the things was, especially if someone's on drugs, when they believe that something is happening to them, like let's say there's a giant monster shaped as a light fixture, a Christmas tree fixture chasing me. Yeah. And this person says, oh my God, like I walk past this tree and it turned into a light monster, and everywhere I go, it's chasing me. You gotta go. You don't deny that person's experience. But you don't tell them it's true either. You kind of say, oh, that seems scary. Like that's a scary experience. You don't tell them that it's not there, because you can't be logical with someone who's having a panic attack, because panic attacks aren't logical. And we got into a bunch of that last time too, where it's like this irrational fear, and you tell someone having the panic attack, like nothing's wrong. What are you freaking out about? It's like, I know nothing's wrong. That's why I'm fucking freaking out, because I'm sitting in my living room right now. I feel like my heart's about to fucking explode. Yep. And so you acknowledge and diffuse is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So I think there could be some sort of procedure if the average person had a very basic training to de-escalate a panic attack in public, and maybe that became more of a norm, where if you were having a panic attack, there were people at venues like music festivals that, like Burning Man, that you could go to that have a certain color shirt or something or whatever, that are trained to be an ear.
Really?
Where you're like, yeah, maybe I'm,
Okay.
that is scary. That is weird. Maybe we should have some shit like that. It should be more, I think it could be more widespread, like some sort of procedural de-escalation of anxiety.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I know when I started first in dealing with anxiety and depression, it was, 10 plus years ago. And it was such a foreign sort of concept to me, where if I had even a fifth of the knowledge I had now, I think I would have been much more better off. But it was one of those things that was stigmatized, and nobody really, because you couldn't see a pain or an impetus for your condition. They just said, go fucking watch TV or, take a breathing exercise. And it's unfortunately, it's not like that.
Yeah, no, not at all. One of the other things in the story that I love is that you have Kevin poke fun at meditation. And he's like, yeah, I tried this fucking meditation bullshit. And I was laughing at it, even as someone who meditate every day. I meditate every day. I did this morning. I used the Sam Harris Waking Up app.
Yeah.
And I know it's ridiculous. Like I can see the ridiculousness in meditation. And sometimes I even tell myself that, where I'm like, I'm sitting on a fucking pillow with my own thoughts, and some days they're just fucking racing around my head, and this is supposed to make me feel better. Like, shouldn't I just listen to some music or a podcast or do something else to distract me from this bullshit?
What's the part in the story? What do you have the line?
I don't have the exact line, but he mentions he mentions something about meditation.
He's trying to meditate, but he can't bear to be alone with his thoughts, and he keeps thinking about where he left his birth certificate.
Yes, and then he's thinking about the Facebook photo he saw of his ex-wife.
Yeah.
And I also connected that towards the middle end of the story, where he, like the actual thought of death is starting to creep in to his mind.
Yeah.
And he's so present. He has like this calm presence about him, kind of like what you were describing when you're watching your own finger bleed out in the faucet, draining into the basin. The possibility of death brings Kevin to extreme presence. And before that, he kind of poked fun at meditation. But one of the things that you can do in meditation is you think about your own death.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was kind of funny that he was like, meditation, whatever, like, fuck my wife, ex-wife, just like saw the Facebook photo, like all the shit's going on in my life. And then all that kind of clears away once it gets worse, and he's just thinking about the current situation and death, the possibility of it, and probably losing blood and all this other shit going on in his head brought him into this moment of extreme presence. So in a sick way, I think it's not an ad for meditation, but it's like a good transition into thinking about death can actually give you presence, because the meditation could be a bunch of things. You don't have to sit on a pillow and listen to Sam Harris. You could you could memento mori, like Stoics did, meditate on your own death. You could write
memento morium, remember to, you will die.
Just like there's so many ways to bring yourself back to presence. So whatever works for you and for him, and for everyone, confronting your own death makes it impossible to not be present.
Well, and that's a really good point, because in the story, everyone who reads that is like, this is by far the darkest story you've written.
Was this not a comedy? I thought it was supposed to be a comedy. Like The Martian was a comedy, and so
it had those absurdist sort of moments where he's calling 911 and he's dreamy, and he's lethargic, and he's just like, you know what, let me get a pizza, you know.
Yeah.
Those, you know, comedic relief there. But when you read the story, you're like, this is super fucking sad. This is terrifying. This is jarring. But towards the end, he changes his perception, and that goes back to the absurd. He is envisioning himself with his mother, who is no longer around, and she's right by his side, and he's laying in front of his sink, and the drain is clogged because he's stuffed it with all of his paper towels, and he's laying on the ground, and he can feel the clogged sink pouring over, and everything is okay because he's picturing it as a shower, and he's back as a kid, and he's taking a shower after playing with his friends in the neighborhood. And the way this story came about is like, I have been taking such a deep dive into this concept of happiness and like how it's been commercialized. You know, open happiness, taste happiness, experience happiness. It's ubiquitous in
like
marketing.
if you're not happy, something's wrong. If you're not constantly happy, yeah.
And we've been conditioned since we were like toddlers, you know?
Yeah.
Drawing fucking happy suns in the skies. Like, and it's not like that. That is the complete opposite. And it's, I feel like it distorts our minds, you know, because we're not in a state of constant happiness. It's not a destination. It's something that we work on. And when it comes back to philosophy, it's whatever brings you that happiness, regardless of how ridiculous or absurd it is. You know, at the end of the day, everyone's subjectivity, you know, when it comes to happiness is their own personal choice.
Yeah.
And when you read that story, you know, in the beginning, he's miserable. You read that he's tried, you know, journaling, he's tried meditation, and then you come to find out that he kicked in his TV. You know, those were his you know, anxiety sort of outlets. And then by the end, his disposition has changed completely.
Yeah.
He's fucking finally happy.
Yeah.
You know? And he might be bleeding out. He might be laying by his sink hallucinating.
Yeah.
But the motherfucker is happy.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
To me, I would say it struck me that he was at peace.
Mm-hmm.
There were definitely, for me, my interpretation of it was there are flecks of happiness, but he ultimately had a moment of peace. And sometimes, or for me, a lot of times, happiness is this thing that's commercialized, like you were saying, that you're supposed to want. You're supposed to always want to have this kind of giddy feeling, and if you don't have that giddy feeling with everything you're doing, then something's is wrong.
Yep.
But you always have access to some sort of peace, but you don't always have access to happiness. So I've been so sad and upset and depressed, but also have had moments of peace within that sadness during my life where I'm like, shit is so fucked right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm breathing calmly and I feel like my body's relaxed.
Yeah.
And I feel peaceful, but I'm also so fucking sad or depressed about something.
Melancholy. Yeah.
And I don't want to be happy in that moment. Like the happiness would be a horrible thing in that moment because it wouldn't be the right emotion. I'd be faking the happiness like we're kind of taught to do in a lot of ways. So to me, it brought Kevin peace where it was finally this, it was almost like all those options that he was talking about earlier in the story. What's going to happen with his ex-wife? Does she give a shit about him? He obviously wasn't over that. And then his job and
he's getting denied LinkedIn interview requests.
getting the LinkedIn is its own hell.
Well, he also talks about how he's on social media.
Yes.
He just watches everybody's stories, but he has no meaningful relationships.
And it's like, oh my God, I'm bleeding out. All of those options are done now. I only have to worry about one thing, and it's that, this may be it. And the taking away of all these options allows you to be extremely present because you're not, for the first time in your life, you're not thinking
100%.
long term. You're just you can only think about now
in that moment. Yep. And there's so the deeper substratum of there's two philosophical tie-ins. So the main one is that there's a reference there when he's gazing into the sink, and he mentions that he's gazing into the abyss, and that is a nod to Friedrich Nietzsche, German philosopher. His most iconic quote is, "If you gaze into the abyss, eventually the abyss will gaze back into you." And it had a negative connotation back in the day where he was referencing, like, if you study monsters, you're more than likely to become a monster. And this is sort of the nihilistic, existential, subterranean aspect of this story, because you can become like anything, whatever you obsess about, whatever you're focusing on day to day, your thoughts, whatever you spend your time engaging with, eventually you will become that, whether it's good or bad. And then in this story, he is engaging constantly with these invasive thoughts, these suicidal ideation, and it's becoming him.
Yeah.
And, his biggest issue is not that he's cut, right? It's that he's got another urge to go and pick that knife up and finish the
job. And part of me was wondering, was the first cut an accident too, or was it
exactly?
It's up to the interpretation, but it's like, did he, maybe he loosened his grip on that one, and you almost, because you can trick yourself. People do it all the time. They lie and then they tell them. I've done it. I lie and then I tell myself the lie so many times that I begin to believe that it's the truth, and then he loosens his grip on the knife and he fucking slices, and you're like, oh my god, I can't believe that happened. But in the back of your mind, that there was a conscious loosening of the grip on that last fucking slice.
Now, do you think that he dies in the end, or what's your interpretation?
I don't think he's dead. That was actually my second through line thought of the story, is that I wrote, he's not dead.
Okay.
I think, and you don't have to answer this because it's up for interpretation. Yeah. People want to
very ambiguous.
Yeah. I think that he earlier on in the story, there was either someone in the vicinity, in the house or the building, maybe someone he was in contact with that was kind of a outside spectator, but not directly involved with what was happening. And he actually called 911. So the 911 call was not a hallucination.
Yeah.
But he starts hallucinating, and you even say that when his mom comes into the story at the end and she puts the hand on his back.
Yeah.
And he thinks, oh, like, my mom's here. How great is this? I think the mom is actually someone else. Either
a responder.
Yeah. I don't think it's a responder, because the mom says help is on the way.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was hallucinating he was hallucinating the voice, but I think he was hallucinating the person, like the figure who it was, because the 911 call, that would be, I think it's tougher to hallucinate a conversation than it is to kind of like mistake a figure, especially when you lose a lot of blood, you get tunnel vision and shit starts to close in, and like it's almost like you're squinting your eyes a little bit and you're not really sure what's what.
Yeah.
And it goes in and out. So I think he heard the conversation. The person was actually saying help was on the way, which he thought was his mom, but was actually someone else who wasn't a first responder. Either, I don't know how close, Catherine is the name of
his wife.
I don't know how close Catherine lived to him. Maybe he sent her some sort of concerning message before the whole incident. Maybe he was like, I'm going to fucking do something to myself. Like, I don't know. Maybe he just, before he cut his hand, he shot off something to her and she was worried and was able to get to him, and she walked in and was like, don't worry, help's on the way. Because that's kind of like a very X thing to say. You don't want to say something emotional, but you want to let the person know that they're okay, because you don't want them to confuse the situation with like, oh, I still want to be with you. It's like, no, I'm here because you're in trouble and help's going to come. So I think it's either maybe another tenant close by, another homeowner, apartment building, whatever he was living, or Catherine.
Okay.
I think he, I don't know if he's still alive, but I do think that it was not his mom.
Okay.
For sure. Like it wasn't,
Well,
it was definitely someone. It was definitely someone that I don't think it was just a hallucination. I think it was a hallucination of someone else that was actually there.
Yeah. And you'll see that a lot of times with people that undergo trauma is like, especially if their parents aren't alive, they were the first kind of symbol of sanctity or sanctuary, their savior. So anytime they undergo some sort of traumatic experience, they'll imagine that their mom or their dad will be there because those were the first caregivers, during their lives. Yeah. So in a sense, he's almost reverting back to his id, when it comes to psychology. And, and I feel like that's ubiquitous in terms of most people. If you're in a dark, shitty, dejected spot, if you don't have a significant other, who do you want there next to you? Probably your parents,
Yeah.
So,
the part about his mom, whether she, whatever your interpretation of his mom is, that made me tear up when I was reading it, because I was thinking about the number of times that I'm gonna see my mom and my parents for the rest of my life. When it comes down to it, isn't that much, and I'm luckier than most people because I live 45 minutes away. I'm gonna go home later today to go see my parents, and if I lived out in California or I lived outside the country, like my girlfriend's parents, she was living with me in New York, and her family's back in France, so she only sees them a few times a year, if that. I can extrapolate my parents' probable lifespan. Let's say they both die on the good end. Let's say they live to 95 years old. That would be a very great life, especially if they were healthy close to the end. They're 65 now, so if I see them 5 times a year for the next 30 years, that's 150 times I'm going to see my parents again. So
it's great though.
Yeah.
Most people don't have that.
Yeah, most people don't have that, and so I consider myself lucky for that. Some people, it might be like 20 or 10.
Yeah. But you read that story and it struck a chord where
it struck a chord with me, because I was like, that's like the ultimate. No matter what I do or what I accomplish, I will always be my mom's son, and that I will never outgrow the childlike sensation of the comforting hand on my,
because they created you, they instilled. So I've been reading a lot of Ernest Becker, and he is a staunch advocate for the first 5 years of your life are the most formative in terms of the life that you're going to live, your traits that you're going to develop, your behaviors that you're going to instill. And that all comes from your parenting, And like, I mean, do you ever think about, like, in 20 years, like, what's your life going to look like? Like, my parents going to be around? Or like, when your parents are not going to be around, like, how will that affect you, Because these are things we can't escape.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think, a lot of having your parents around is such an emotional safety net.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky enough, a financial safety net too. Like, if my life went to shit, I could just move back in with my parents 45 minutes away. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes this home. And then when your parents are gone, sure, they might leave you with some stuff, some material things, but that emotional,
you're an orphan.
Yeah, the emotional feeling of this is going to be okay, or when I was when everything would be chaotic, when I'm a teenager,
you could always
in
fall
high
back
school,
on
I could always call my mom and tell her that the world's unfair, like this teacher fucking wakes up every morning and thinks about how to make my life a living hell, and she's just like, all right, like, let's calm down and think about this, and
who else are you going to have a conversation like that with, except your mom? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe your partner, maybe I'm lucky enough to have 2 brothers too, so we also have very strong bonds, especially since we're all also living pretty close to each other as well.
That's
so we have that close tie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think I know what I'm going to feel when I lose my parents, because I've seen it so much in movies and I've read about it, and I've heard my friends who have already lost their parents talk about it, and guests on the podcast talk about it, but nothing ever prepares you for going through that moment.
They say that it instills like a permanent sort of melancholy inside your heart, because you experience all these moments, and if you have kids and they grow up, and everything is great to witness, but at the same time it's kind of tainted because you don't have your parents there to witness it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's one of those aspects of life that is so, it's tough to not be nihilistic when you kind of give yourself these objective sort of viewpoints. There's a quote by Don DeLillo from his novel White Noise, and he says, "There's no irony of the human condition that we're the highest form of beings on the earth, but we're ineffably sad because we know what all other animals don't know, and that's that we're gonna die." You know, like
that's I was reading some Ernest Becker too, and I watched a couple videos of people explaining his philosophy on YouTube, and one of the things that he believes, or he wrote about, he said the basic motivation for human behavior is our biological need to control our basic anxiety, to deny the terror of death. So at a basic principle standpoint, everything we do, according to Ernest Becker, is a reaction to our own impending doom, and to avoid taking
now
that
he
in.
has another book that comes out, and it's called The Denial of Death, and it's all about how we as a society are conditioning ourselves to avoid talking about death, to just pushing it off, to being like, oh no, let's not talk about that, let's put on Disney Plus and let's watch this very wholesome movie here. And we don't really understand. I mean, the one thing about life is that we are all going to experience death. Like, that is certain, you know, but while we're alive, we're doing everything we can to avoid it.
Yeah.
You know, and in the end, it's not preparing us to handle that sort of aspect correctly. You know?
Yeah. When I was going through some stuff on Ernest Becker to prepare for this podcast, it made me think about my own creative spark and internal drive. And it made me question that drive, because I want to think, oh, I have this creative engine inside me and it churns every day because I just want to put out my thoughts into the world, and I'm just this creative caterpillar just blossoming, and hopefully I'll be rewarded for that someday.
You're
and I'm
the
like,
main character in your story.
And I'm like, am I just doing this because I'm afraid to die, and I want to have these podcasts floating out there to be my legacy? And every podcast I record is actually this extremely selfish act of denying my own death and living beyond my physical death, and trying as hard as I can to not have a digital death.
Yeah, because fill the void as best you can.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a piss, man. Can we take a break?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Because I got to go put some money in my meter here.
Go do it. That was a sexual innuendo. Yes. My meter's the asshole and money is Chris's cock. All right, so...
Let's do it.
So, back from this bathroom break.
Back, yes.
So, one of the things that we exchanged messages about before the podcast was the Hedonic Treadmill.
Yes.
Would you want to...
Yep.
Explain what that is to people, and then we can get into it.
I will explain it in the most
concept.
scholarly way.
Yes.
So,
it's going to go right over my head.
No, I'm going to be as least pedagogical as I can be, more conversationalist. But as I mentioned, I was really getting, this past year, I was just immersing myself in this novel. And
let me just get this a little bit closer.
Yeah, just...
Yeah, get it right there. Oh, it's good to eat it with your tongue.
So soft.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Just stimulates all my
ASMR.
senses.
Don't make me come again.
I fuck with ASMR. I'm not gonna lie. Right?
ASMR can be very soothing, and it makes me feel ashamed that I'm so soothed by the ASMR, because I'm like, what about this is soothing me? Do I have some psychotic thing that I haven't figured out yet? That this woman breathing into a microphone is putting me at peace.
Dude, shout out to Matty Tingles. He's this overweight Asian guy, and he has this most sonorous voice, and he's very breathy. But holy shit, that dude will soothe me, man. Yeah.
Tilt that up a little bit towards your...
Tilt it.
Yep, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. And I'll indulge with some Matty Tingles. Check him out on YouTube.
So the Hedonic
Treadmill.
Yeah.
So I was really kind of exploring... so my novel that I am really honing in on, I'm refining right now. It's 95% complete. I'm going to be pitching it first thing this new year. I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to really kind of relish the process, making sure that I explore all my creativity. I didn't want to leave anything behind. This novel is super intellectual, super entertaining. For the 3 people that have read it so far, they're like, this hands down is the best book I've read in years.
I'm offended that I'm not one of them.
Well, I sent you my newest short story. You didn't fucking read it, so...
That's because I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the novel.
I know. I get there's a shout out to Poignancy Literary Magazine that reaches out to me once a month, asks me about the novel, and I'm like, I'm still working on it.
And they reach out to me once a month, ask me for Chris Cooper Round 2 podcast.
Do they really?
They've sent me a few messages. They're hype about it. They're hype.
Listen, I love it. Never in a million years that I think I'd develop a fan base and people would enjoy my shit, because I fucking hate myself, right?
Dude, I hate myself too, because I thought I was gonna start my own following for Auxoro.
Okay.
And I've started a cult following for Chris Cooper through Auxoro. Yes. I feel like my my cult following that I wanted to be, that idea, has become cannibalized by you. So this is a very hard conversation for me, because you've converted my followers before I had a chance to.
Well, listen, we're going to start a fight club, and the first rule of fight club is you do not talk about fight club. All right. And
so shut the fuck up.
Yeah, exactly.
Just you two listening to this, just shut your mouth. Stop listening.
Oh, shit. So the Hedonic Treadmill. And this kind of correlates with this whole concept I've been wrestling with this commercialization of happiness, and, how we are so conditioned to achieve happiness, and how we want happiness consistently. We want to wake up and we want to be surrounded with the person we love. We want to wake up and bask in the glorious fucking sunlight that's coming in through our window. And we want to love everything. And we just want to have this euphoric fucking bliss at all times. And that's not realistic whatsoever. And this concept of the hedonic treadmill was really postulated in the 70s by Campbell and Brickman, and their thesis, their paper that came out was called Hedonic Relativism. And because I'm a writer, I am just I get a hard on for the etymology with these sort of concepts. So hedonic is, kind of the adjective form of hedonism. Everybody knows what hedonism is. It's just the pursuit of pleasure, debauchery to all that sort of degrees. You could go outside of here and you can participate in orgies and foreign lands, and it's the name of that. The cults
dose each other with Molly for a podcast.
But hedonism, that's the pleasure seeking aspect of life. So this concept of the hedonic treadmill was, for me, just completely groundbreaking, because the biggest thesis, the biggest takeaway from this experiment, and they've done a sundry of experiments with this since it first came out, and the main concept of this was derived on an experiment that they had, and they had 2 controlled groups. They had one controlled group that had won the lottery, And then the other control group experienced the most abject situation. They suffered a severe traumatic spinal cord injury, something that would severely negatively impact their quality of life.
So they got actual lottery winners. They didn't just tell them they won the lottery.
Yeah. No, this is like
an actual spinal cord victims.
Yes.
Okay.
And they studied their baseline of happiness over the span of 5 years. And the biggest takeaway was that after 5 years, regardless of your circumstance, whether it is a positive or it's a negative circumstance, whatever the vicissitudes are, you essentially return to the same base level of happiness. And, why is this relevant? Because in this day and age, and it's pervasive, it's getting worse. We are commercialized with happiness, that we need to attain it. We need to seek it. And we're constantly living our lives with our jobs where it's like, if I can make such and such amount of money, if I could do X, then I will be happy. Then if I do this, if I achieve this, if this happens, I'm going to receive a golden card in the mail from fucking Willy Wonka. And I'm going to open it up and it's going to say, congratulations, you are happy. And it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't. And so if you want to, kind of dive into the intricacies of it, obviously there's anomalies, genetics come into it. There's some circumstances where if you're in jail, it might take a little bit longer for you to rise back up to that stable level of happiness. They've also seen that if you've been divorced, it might take a little bit longer, but essentially you can experience the two completely contrast aspects of life. And over the period of time, you will both return to the same level of happiness.
So if you had a guy whose income was $100 million a year, and you have another guy whose income is 100,000, you could look at that guy and know that there's a good chance you're both running on a similar, if not the same, baseline level of happiness, which is when you wake up and you go throughout the day, if you asked the guy making 100 million a year to click a button 10 times throughout the day and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you feeling right now? And you gave the same button to a guy making 100K a year as opposed to 100 million. There's a good chance it could be pretty similar.
Could be pretty similar, but I mean, that's a little more nuanced, whereas you have these two complete abject scenarios where like spinal cord injuries and winning the lottery, like you could see the bigger difference between those two, and there's not a difference, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So like if you win the lottery, what happens is you have higher expectations. You want a bigger house. You want to spend more money. And after the span of 5 years, in the beginning, sure, you surge in happiness. Love it. Need this. Then you're buying jet skis. Then you're buying a house. And then it's like, I only have a shore house. I need a ski house. I need this. You know what I mean? So you are constantly adapting to that level. And I feel like that is something that people really need to kind of like swallow at this point, that there isn't one thing that you can do or achieve that is going to be like, done it, fucking happy. Here I am, Yeah. And I feel like that's something that nobody is really aware of right now.
If you win the lottery, let's say $100 million, you win the lottery as opposed to the spinal cord injury. You win the lottery, you get this initial surge of happiness that lasts for however many months or years. And then you keep trying to purchase more things to fill that void and keep you at a similar level of happiness, where the person who gets a spinal cord injury, they will be in a level of unhappiness for months or years. And then they are almost doing the opposite. They're becoming grateful for the things they already have to bring them up to that level of happiness.
Exactly.
So it's like you have one person who surged up and then they're trying to get more and more and more and more. And that is bringing them back down.
Exactly.
And then you have someone who's surged down and they're like, I have less, I'm fine. I have less, I'm fine. And by recognizing that they have less and still are happy, that's making them even happier. Maybe they encounter someone who had a spinal cord injury and also got brain damage or doesn't have legs. And they're like, oh, well, at least I'm not, that guy or girl. I still have my mental capacities. And so they're...
it. And it makes you more grateful for the shit that you do have.
Yeah.
But that to me is just like, it's mind-boggling, because for me, I work my ass off. Like, I'm a writer part-time. Like, I get residual income. It's great. But I work my ass off as a freelance copywriter and as a senior copywriter for a Fortune 500 retailer, And I find myself where I'm like, if I can make this amount of money, if I could do this, if I could do that, like, I'll eventually be happy. But in the grand scheme of things, that stuff is only temporary. It's that short little jolt. And then you're going to return back to that baseline.
So with that information, what are the things you do throughout the day or throughout the week? Is there something that you remind yourself of? Is it an activity you do? Things that help you remove yourself from the hedonic treadmill and place you back onto the basic level of awareness and gratefulness in some sense for what you already have. How do you take yourself off that, that loop, the hedonic loop, and then put yourself?
It's not easy, and it becomes more of a habit than anything. But I think it starts with the gratitude and acknowledging how things are, acknowledging things that you normally take for granted. For me personally, every day I wake up and my parents are healthy, happy. That's a win for me, like I'm working on this novel and that's like the end game. Like I'm probably done with I have one more short story that I'm pitching right now. But after that, like my main goal is this novel that I want to get at. And it's not a collection of short stories. It's an actual novel. It's a complete novel with an array of characters. But I think it's important for us to every day and it sounds so cliche, so fucking live, laugh, love bullshit. But I think every single day you've got to realize how fortunate you are for the situation you're in. Yeah. It might not be the best. I'm 34 at this point. I feel like most people will approach a midlife crisis where they've lived a couple of different lives, where they have a couple of different episodes and they're on season 5 of their lives and they're maybe nostalgic for season 2 because, they've had a different cast of people in their lives in certain times. But at the end of the day, to see where you're at, like you are an amalgamation of the people you've met, the encounters that you've had, the experiences that you've had, and to just be able to wake up and to realize how grateful you are is as blasé as it sounds, like it's the most important part.
Yeah. So if we go with the seasons metaphor, when you have a show that goes, most shows don't stay well written. They're not good past the first couple, maybe 2 or 3 seasons.
That's because their fucking writers are lazy.
So if you feel like you're in season 5 or 6 of your life and you feel like you're stretching the same material out just for the sake of getting to another season, what is the... I don't want to say solution, but what's the kick in the ass to bring you back to feeling like you're in season 1 again? Do you just say, fuck it, I'm going to do something new? Do you look at what you're doing in a new light? So you don't completely switch careers, but you change perspectives. So it's like, you're living a different show now, but you didn't have to give up your prior experience. What's the answer to that?
Introspection. Okay. And I only maybe mentioned this once or twice, and again, like I've had a psychologist reach out to me on Instagram saying like, you shouldn't be giving clinical or clinician advice and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm just talking about.
He reached out after the podcast
after the
or
last
something?
podcast. Yeah.
He said you shouldn't be giving clinical advice.
I'm like, listen, dude, I said I was not the expositor of mental health. Right? I'm like, I'm just speaking for myself. I thought I made that very clear.
Yeah. And also, that's my thing. I have the fake prescription pad. Yes. I'm giving people clinical advice on the side on Instagram.
We just snorted 3 lines of Xanax before this interview.
Yes, I mixed mine with Adderall, but yes, that is 100% true. That's my thing. But yeah, I mean, we said a million times on the first podcast.
I thought I was very clear.
Yeah, we're not doctors. I mean, I was wearing a doctor's uniform. Yes. I did have my stethoscope, and so that might have thrown people off. But
exactly.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
No, so yeah, but what I'm saying is that, and you know, I try to, you know, it all goes back to philosophy. If you ever read Friedrich Nietzsche, Soren Kierkegaard, their works are 200 plus years old, and they are still timeless. And it all comes back to introspection. We have a tendency to seek outside of ourselves. We have a tendency to reach certain things, to accomplish certain things, and that'll make us feel fulfilled. But in the reality, we don't really understand ourselves. We don't understand our proclivities for certain things that we do. We don't understand our penchants for things that we like. And to get to that state where you're completely content with yourself, you have got to do an introspective look. You've got to see the habits that you've learned over the years, where they stem from, how you react when you're upset, you experience a disappointment. Are you in control of your emotions? Or if you get cut off in traffic, are you going to fucking lose your mind and try to fight somebody at a red light, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there are so much introspection that I feel as a society we are too afraid to venture into.
Yeah.
And we're constantly looking outward. We're like, let me go visit this fucking place out here that has a beautiful sunset. Maybe I'll find myself.
Yeah.
And like, you can travel wherever the fuck you want, but until you start traveling inward, you're never going to really have a sense of solace.
Well, we have the stories of what a successful career or a relationship is supposed to look like. That's given to us by movies or media or by quote unquote experts. And we compare our lives that we know better than anyone else. We can reflect our lives in different ways to people who are watching us on social media, but we know the life we're living, and so we see the other depictions, then we compare ourselves to that small slice that is the depiction of other people's lives, and we say, okay, there must be something more because everyone else is living like this, or everyone else has this thing that I'm constantly chasing. But it's like we're all shooting off these small slices of this portrayed and many times faux happiness into the ethosphere, and then people compare that to their own actual life. And I feel like I almost had a rebirth of podcast meaning during the pandemic, like almost a professional rebirth, because my goal from the start of podcasting, when I started doing it consistently, it was about 3 years ago, was I want to get to the point where I can pay rent on a studio, I can hire a producer, I can just be hands off on everything. I walk in, I record the podcast, I walk out, I hand it to someone, I say, go deal with this, edit, chop it up, go post it. And I'm lucky enough now that I have people like Manoa, who edited the last podcast, at Manoa Rain, and then I work with another guy online who does some of the audio for episodes that I don't have time to do myself. So I do have people that I work with, but it's not like that ballin' out Joe Rogan style studio where you walk in, you have your producer, he's there with you, you're paying him a salary, you're renting out the studio space.
Yeah.
And I was really thinking to myself, which was easy because I was alone for a lot of the pandemic, like, why do I want to rent a studio when I basically make a studio in my apartment every time I have a guest over? Why do I need a producer when I can just do a few hours of work and teach myself how to record it. Yep. And then I can send other people the files if I need to, who can edit and process the episode and send it back to me. Like, why does it have to be this glorification of the podcasts that I see on YouTube, which are great. And a lot of those guys have worked years and years, started podcasting 10, 15 years before me. And so I'm just seeing, I click a video and I see, oh, this dude has a fucking ball in studio, Miami or LA. They have 2 producers. They have all these sick cameras. I'm looking at the behind the scenes stuff and I'm like, like I need to get to this level. And I thought, I'm like, I can do everything I want to do with a podcast right now. It might get more sparkly in the future as I get more and more subscribers. Shout out auxoro.supercast.com. Shameless plug for bonus episodes. But like I have everything I want to do right now with podcasting. I can do everything. I can have meaningful conversations. I can reach out to guests. I can record it myself when I need to. I can have other people help me out. And so this extra level that I would think of when I was kind of on the podcast Hedonic Treadmill, that own Hedonic Treadmill, like the podcast version of it, that was just some story that I had in my head that I needed to attain. And that didn't come from within. That came from shit I was seeing. And only when I was alone with my own thoughts, like the introspection, did I realize that I don't actually fucking want this. I just think I do because I'm seeing it all the time every time I go on YouTube. But really, I could just do this on audio and have a $100 recorder, and that's the only expense I'm going to have.
So you would say you're a victim of the of mimetic desire.
Mimetic desire, yeah. Like I had Luke Burgess on the podcast a few months ago, who wrote the book Wanting, which goes into mimetic desire. And mimetic desire can be great in a lot of ways because we see what other people desire and we can analyze those desires and see if we want it for ourselves. But what I was experiencing was an example of mimetic desire that I was unaware of because it felt like coming from within, but it was an external source of desire. And when I really thought about it, and the conversation with Luke and reading his book might have had something to do with it because it was around that same time during the pandemic where I'm like, why the fuck do I even want this?
Well, it's funny because this is the writer in me, but the etymology with mimetic desire goes back to Aristotle and Plato. And, it's a Greek word for mimesis. And Plato and Aristotle kind of had a conflict between their beliefs on it and whether it was worthwhile, where Aristotle thought that mimesis is pretty much the most ingrained sort of behavior of us as a society. Like, we learn by imitating. The word mimesis is a Greek word for imitate, where Plato was like, oh, fuck these posers, all these poets, they are literally just copying each other, and when they were talking about like the Greek tragedies. But to see the evolution of the term mimesis to make it into mimetic theory, and then mimetic desire, so Rene Girard, which is actually more of a contemporary concept in the early 2000s, thought to explore the psychological phenomenon on how conflict arises between people, and that people, it's not that people want too many things, they all want the same thing. And one of the best metaphors for this is when children are put in a room and they have a selection of toys, and whatever toy the first kid picks up, every other kid is going to want to go and play with it. And it's just that they're imitating each other, and it's the basis of everything nowadays, especially with social media. It's the reason why fucking people want jeans with holes in them, or just jeans in general, because they see people wearing it. It's the reason why influencers are so in demand nowadays, because it's like, oh, I see what they're doing, I want to be like that. Like, we are such a mimetic society, whereas we're always where like our desires are not really autonomous. We are highly influenced by what we see and what other people have.
Not at all. Yeah, it's like you have people like Kim Kardashian who can wear jeans on her head, and that will become a trend because people want what Kim Kardashian wants before the actual thing that she wants.
Yeah.
They desire her desire, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where a lot of trends come from in fashion. It's where people, there are these iconic people in society that have that are at the top, and then they broadcast their desires through social media, and then other people see that, and we've learned to desire what the people at the top want to desire. And then also there's positive forms of mimetic desire too, where I listen to a conversation like with Ari Shaffir and Tim Ferriss and hear someone talk about like meditation or riffing in stand-up comedy or whatever it is, and try to apply and learn about those things because I think, okay, this person is someone I admire and this has made a change in them. And so I want to desire some of the things they desire because they are a person that's doing things that I want to do, that I feel are like the basic desires in me, which maybe those may not even be basic desires, like the desire to podcast. Maybe that was something, like there's a lot of mimesis in podcasting where people started having conversations for 3 hours, like Joe Rogan, Mark Maron, Howard Stern, where before that, no one thought that people would want to listen to a 3-hour conversation.
Yep.
And now that those conversations are out there and people want it, now other people want to do that, myself included, because one of the reasons is because it is a known desire of other people. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think anyone else wanted this. It would be crazy to do this without an audience. Yeah. And at the same time, it's also fulfilling. So I do think there's an internal factor to it. Also, you can't just run on the desires of other people. Eventually there has to be a part of that desire that also feels like it fulfills you as well. So I go back and forth about that a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's all too common to conflate desire with needs. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the top tier is this self-enlightenment and is this sense of understanding yourself, and there's multiple layers to it. But when it comes to mimesis, like, we are such a mimetic society. I mean, whether it's advertising or it's Instagram or it's all that shit, and it makes you kind of pose that question is if we didn't have anything, like hypothetically, say we don't have our phones and we're put in the middle of a fucking a deserted island, right? How do you form your identity, without stuff that we identify with around us?
Is this as we are now?
No.
Or is this just from the beginning?
From the beginning. Like, we are so consumed with identifying with stuff that we want as a part of our ego, and like things that we identify with that gives us value. Yeah. But it's like, if we don't have this external stimuli constantly, how do you define yourself from the most intrinsic level?
Well, for that, people have already done this, but we could look at indigenous societies that basically have no contact with the outside world and see what they want and desire and look at their levels of happiness. And I'm sure a lot of those people are very happy. Yeah. And I don't know. I've never come in contact.
What is the basic level? It's like
what's the
being
basic
fed,
level? Yeah.
Shelter, warmth, a companion.
Because you don't know what else is out there. You don't know that you can become a TikTok star when you're living in the Amazon and your only concern is, I have to walk this many miles to get water, and I have to prepare food, and then I help, build whatever shelter we have or tents or dancing activities. Your concerns are very limited to a certain number of things, and your mind can't even conceive of the other options out there.
Yeah.
And that might even be a way to improve your own fulfillment, is to limit your options. Kind of like what we were talking about in Bleed, where the impending doom of death limits your options to what you have right in this moment, and you have this sense of peace because nothing else is a possibility in that moment. You can't do any of those other things until you take care of the blood that's pouring out of you, because it's so threatening and so immediate that it forces you into that present moment. It could be that we have to limit our put some sort of cap on what we desire, put some sort of limit on our expectations that have been force fed to us, and go introspectively however we can to realign those expectations.
But it requires action, like you have to be active. You can't just be like, oh yeah, I'll do that. But it's like an everyday occurrence. Like you have got to choose to do these things, you know?
So one of the things I wanted to get into is Kratom.
Yes.
Kratom.
Yeah. Do we have time to take bathroom break?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
Got all the time in the world.
I got a lot to talk about with Kratom.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Especially the pronunciation.
Yes. Kratom.
Are we gonna snort some lines? It's only fitting.
I could snort another one today.
Can we talk about Kratom?
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about Kratom. Kratom.
Listen.
Let's get into Kratom.
I'm a writer, so let's take a stance right now. On the Auxoro podcast, we are going to get down to the semantics, the phonetics of Kratom. How do we pronounce it? I've seen Kratom, Kratom, Kratom. My vote is for me as a grammar savant. I would say it's Kratom. Or not Kratom, Kratom.
So you see, I want it to be Kratom because that sounds the best to me. It has
it's disarming.
the aesthetic ring to it. Kratom sounds like Target.
It does.
It's like
right?
you're in Target, bro. You're not in Target.
It sounds like a contour that you put on your face.
And also Kratom cast. If we ever start a podcast where we take massive amounts of Kratom and then just go on tangents, we'll call it Kratom cast.
Right.
So a Kratom cast just doesn't sound right.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
What about you? What do you feel?
I mean, from a writer, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on me. I mean, you got two syllables. The second syllable is definitely Tom, Adam. So I have a problem with pronouncing the first syllable as Cray because it's Kra. I mean, honestly,
You like Kratom?
I think so. I mean, as the writer in me, I would say Kratom.
Yeah, Kratom.
Yeah. So
what if it's Kratom? Like there's a upside down triangle on the O.
Yeah,
so you get like that expanded.
I'm all for it, man.
Kratom.
I mean, anything that gets the people going, I'm all for it. I just don't see the Y in there.
Yeah.
If there was a Y in there, then maybe I'd go for it. But
yeah, I'm open to being corrected and punished.
Or we could call it the plant form, the Mitragyna.
Mitragyna speciosa.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and that's fun to say because it sounds like you're going to say like vagina, but it's close.
Mitragyna vagina.
Mitragyna vagina.
You could probably lick some kratom off a vagina. That would be a nice sexual.
I feel like that would be the best of both worlds.
Yeah, because you want the moisture mixed with the kratom. You wouldn't have to mix it with anything except maybe if you want to put on a little drop of honey, like some sort of vanilla lubricant, lubricant, and then the kratom, the pussy juice, and the lubricant would mix together into this peaceful euphoria, and you wouldn't
saporous taste.
Yes,
I agree.
exactly.
Okay,
and you wouldn't have to slit your own fingers to make yourself bleed out to reach that level of peace, you could just lick kratom off a pussy and get the same feeling.
Okay, I'm all for it.
I'm going to start an app.
You should.
Pussy kratom.
Hashtag.
Yeah, hashtag kratom pussy. Kratom pussy. So speaking of kratom, kratom, however you pronounce it, what drew you to kratom? Because you informed me of what kratom was, and I actually took some before this podcast. Some super speciosa, which I'm gonna
fucked up right now.
I'm not gonna remember this at all. I'm gonna be when I edit this episode. I'm gonna be listening to it for the first time because I don't remember anything.
So
what got you into it?
Oh man, it's a great story. So
he just drank 3 tablespoons of kratom right there.
No, I wish I had some kratom earlier this morning.
Yeah.
So my first experience with kratom was I had a coworker who was this real Goodwill Hunting type of dude, like super intellectual.
Matt Damon.
Yeah, very handsome, very tall.
More Ben Affleck than if he was tall.
More Ben Affleck than anything. He had dark features, but he was super like intellectual. But he was playing soccer in college, and he tore his ACL, his MCL. Terrible injuries, and he, like so many others, got addicted to OxyContin. And I'm not trying to shit on Western medicine, but the analgesic sort of push with Western medicine is such a fucking crock of shit right now. And he got addicted to OxyContin, and he was a D1 athlete, never touched that shit in his life. And he started experimenting with kratom to come off of what he was dealing with. He had a year of OxyContin, and they literally were just like, oh yeah, you don't need to come off of it. You just can stop cold turkey. And that's such bullshit.
The OxyContin, they said stop cold turkey.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, we'll decrease your dosage and then you'll be fine, which is such bullshit. If anybody's watched Dope Sick on Hulu, like you can see the influence that Purdue Pharma had on the FDA is just it's jarring. I was watching and I'm Googling. It's like there's no way, 100% accurate. And he's kind of like a tortured person. He was a writer and he was dealing with a lot of pain. So he turned me on to kratom, and I tried it first. I did a small dosage. And
how much was it at first?
Maybe 3 tablespoons. No. I'm sorry.
3 teaspoons?
Yeah. It was like a very small dosage.
So about like 3 grams?
Yeah, about 3 grams. About 3 grams. Okay. And like you felt loopy, you felt like a little concentrated. It felt good, So I took that for a little bit, and I still compete in strongman in my free time. Like I'll still be deadlifting and pressing, and I still have competitive lifts. Like I can deadlift 600, I can squat, almost 500. And I noticed that I was getting like these lingering aches and it's not from strongman. It was from sitting at a desk, hunching over a keyboard and just typing all day. And so I started experimenting a little more with kratom. And, so anybody that doesn't really understand what kratom is it is a Mitragina plant, and it's pretty much a leaf, and it's indigenous to Asia, and they've been using it for thousands of years. Even some cultures literally set up their homes, their shelters, to be around these kratom leaves because they had such a wealth of purposes. And, obviously when you come across a leaf that has shown to combat pain and pain management, you're going to get Big Pharma upset about it. So they tried to ban it in 2018. I think it's pretty much banned in Malaysia. I think
I think it was just lifted in Thailand. I saw something about it being lifted in Thailand.
I know Indonesia is the
I'll
the
have
one
to double
place
check
get
that
it.
after the podcast, but I believe I saw something where it was being lifted in Thailand.
So it's an alkaloid. It's an alkaloid, which is exactly like caffeine. It's exactly like tobacco or nicotine. And the one thing that gets the FDA, all riled up is because it has some opioid agonist sort of properties where it can affect your opioid receptors. And what that does is it actually kind of assuages any sort of pain that you have. But from the research that they've done, they've shown that there's no really addictive properties. It can be addictive in terms of habitual use, whereas like I'm in pain and I don't want to be in pain anymore, so I want to use this. But the big pharma, Western medicine, which is great, but anytime that there's any sort of analgesic sort of benefits, big pharma is going to jump in and say, "Oh no, we need to ban that stuff. We need to turn it into a pill form and change a molecule and patent it and stuff like that."
Yeah.
So like
what they're trying to do with ivermectin, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, big pharma honestly is the biggest piece of shit. Like I'm not even afraid to say it right now. I mean, the way they handle pain management, it's a fucking scam. It is a complete scam. They're conditioned to treat, not to cure. And this kratom leaf that has been around for thousands of years has shown exponential benefits in terms of pain management.
Yeah.
And as of right now, it's not regulated. You can get it in the US. I can get it at any smoke shop. You take it in small dosages.
Yeah, you can take it pill form, powder form. I took it in mixed with water.
Yep.
Do a tea, put some honey in it.
Yeah. And in small dosages, it's a stimulant. In large dosages, it's more of a sedative. But it has so many beneficial factors to it. And they've tried desperately to kind of pinpoint it to causing deaths and this and that. But then you do the research and you find that the deaths that are associated with it are in conjunction with other drugs and heroin and stuff like that. Yeah. You will never find a death specifically caused from kratom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a little bit of a different path into kratom. So you told me about the drug and we exchanged. I think you sent me a few articles and then I watched the documentary that Mark Bell made about kratom, the same guy who made Bigger, Faster, Stronger. And I wasn't dealing with any nagging nerve pain when I started taking kratom I want to say it's probably about a year ago now. I had a couple nerve surgeries when I was in college on my elbow from baseball, but that pain is 95% of the time not there unless I'm doing some sort of activity where my elbow has to flex back into external rotation, which most of the time when I'm lifting or, doing mace or Muay Thai or whatever, I'm not in that position. I have to be throwing something to externally flex my elbow. So I wasn't looking for a pain solution. What I was interested in is experimenting with things that would open me up for podcasting and give me a little bit of a kick, but also ease a little bit of the anxiety that goes into podcasting. And I know nothing will ever completely get rid of that, but I was drinking coffee before podcasts in the morning and early afternoon. And then for a lot of podcasts, depending on what time zone the person is, I will record at night. So I might start some podcasts at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, where for me, I didn't want to drink coffee because that was going to keep me up
all night. Yeah.
And so I wanted something for a little kick that I would be able to fall asleep on. And so I came across kratom, and you sent me information on it. Ended up watching the documentary, buying some products from Urban Ice, which is in the documentary, and also I have the powder from Super Speciosa, and so I started taking one pill in the morning, which is A full serving is 2 pills, so 75 milligrams of caffeine and 600 milligrams of kratom.
Yeah.
And so 1 pill would be half that. So about 35, 40 milligrams of caffeine.
Yeah.
And 300 milligrams of kratom.
Okay.
Which is an imperceptible dose, but I'd never taken it before. So I did feel something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
did you feel like loquacious, like you were ready
I felt
to
just more almost like a less anxious Adderall like effect.
Yes,
like Adderall
yes.
gets you fucking like edgy as shit.
Yeah,
And and sometimes on Adderall in college I would get too jacked up. So I'm like, I gotta go outside and pack a dip or smoke a cigarette because I need to. It was like a less nervy Adderall like sensation. And I was taking a low dose. And so now during the week I will take 2 of those pills, which is in the morning, I will take 600 milligrams of kratom and 75 milligrams of caffeine. It's combined in the pill. And then in the afternoon, if I feel like I want to take it, I will do a half teaspoon of the kratom powder from Super Speciosa, which is 1.2 grams of kratom.
Okay.
Full teaspoon is 2.4.
Yeah.
Half teaspoon is 1.2. And so that is what I take. And I was going off how I felt, and I didn't want to build any sort of addiction or reliance on it. So I was keeping my dose low on purpose. And I actually started out higher with taking a full teaspoon in the afternoons and actually cut that in half.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I forget about it, or I just purposely don't take it because I feel like I don't need it. And I started taking it with podcasts before, adding it in with the coffee if it was an earlier podcast in the day, or I would take it at night, and I felt like this open, like slightly more open feeling.
Right.
And I would still get anxious at the beginning, but it was toned down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I was more emotionally open, and I took it before this podcast, and I feel, you know, like it kind of opens the door to feeling things a little bit more.
It kind of quiets that inner critic. Like, it gives you that freedom where you're a little more lucid, where like, so for me as a writer, like I have 1,000 thoughts going at all times. And like, I extract the thought and then I kind of hone it and craft it into like a logical sentence. But I find that when I take the kratom, that they're a little more developed, you know, like, and you don't feel that resistance to say things. Like you're a little more comfortable.
For me, I rarely take a dose higher than 5 grams. I may take a 5-gram dose before a podcast, but I don't think I've ever taken a dose. Like I scrape off the teaspoon on the bag. Like I'm not heaping 2 teaspoons. I might take 1 heaping teaspoon, so like a 3 or 4 gram dose, but I don't think I've ever taken more than 5 grams.
Okay.
In a 24-hour period. And so I was taking those doses, and from the documentary, I knew that there was also this other side of kratom, this cancel culture side of kratom, which people getting addicted and big pharma saying, you know, this drug is like taking heroin. But I did a YouTube video where I said, this is my experience with kratom. And I had a few people comment like, yeah, you feel good because you're basically microdosing heroin. And I'm like, I mean, well, I don't think heroin addicts forget about heroin. Like I've literally gone days, weeks without it. I'm just like, I don't even realize I haven't taken it. But
not for nothing though, kratom, they affect your opioid receptors. But they don't contain any actual addictive properties. Yeah. Besides the fact that like you feel pain and you don't want to feel pain. Yeah. Like if you ever watch Dope Sick on Hulu, that whole fucking ordeal with OxyContin, like, is wild. Like I watched that whole series and I'm Googling this shit. And I'm like, did this really happen? And they literally manipulated the FDA. They paid them off. They paid all these pain associations to be, you know, spokespersons for this drug. And you're talking 30 years later, they finally paid out the biggest payout in history. And Richard Sackler is still a billionaire with no fucking accountability. So, you know, like, I'm not shitting on Western medicine, but if you examine the fucking pain management, the palliative sort of industry, it's a the biggest fucking scam.
Yeah. I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for saying this. So I went through the subreddits Kratom and also quitting Kratom.
Okay.
And there's I was interested in what people said about quitting Kratom. And there's a lot of people in there that say that Kratom absolutely destroyed their lives. Like heroin, like if you didn't know what the drug was called, you would think you were reading a quitting heroin subreddit. And I'm reading this, and I'm not saying people don't get addicted to Kratom.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's happened. People report taking doses in the quitting Kratom group on Reddit of 20, 30, 50. I think one guy even said he was taking 100 grams in a day, which I don't know how that's fucking possible. But I also was reading through the comments, and there were a lot of comments that seemed robotic, like a lot of the same comments by different accounts. And the conspiratorial side of my brain was thinking, are these fake profiles created by, either big pharma or someone with an interest in seeing Kratom fall into piling on the quitting Kratom subreddit, which is probably the biggest group of people online that are against Kratom. Like the documentary that I sent you, the other one, not the Bigger, Faster, Stronger, Hamilton Morris.
The cornucopia?
Not cornucopia. Pharma something.
Was that on Kratom?
Kratom, yeah.
Okay,
I think his name is Hamilton Morris. I forget, but he mentions the quitting Kratom subreddit in a couple interviews he does on YouTube, and it's like this. Kratom's a very divisive drug. And I know that I'm talking purely from personal experience and some research on the drug, but there's a feeling in me that a lot of the anti-Kratom sphere on social media is contrived by some other force, because I can't imagine becoming addicted to this substance.
No.
Like, I've taken weeks break. I started taking a year ago. I've taken a month break from it. I would describe, at the doses that I was taking, which is less than 5 grams a day, most days like 1 to 2 grams, I would describe not taking Kratom as easier than going a day without coffee. To me, I feel more of an emotional disturbance getting off of caffeine than I do not drinking Kratom for a day. And then the next day, I don't even realize that I'm not on it.
Well, so for me, for Kratom, when I take it, it's when I've been dealing, like, I still partake in strongman sort of aspects, and that's something that's just like ingrained in me. Like, I do a lot of cerebral writing, and I need to combat that with like more visceral, barbaric sort of fucking strength movements to just keep myself balanced, because I'm always in my head, and I need to do something physical to combat that, to balance it. But when I take the Kratom, I use it as a substitute for coffee, because if I drink coffee, it's great, but then I'm pissing all day. It's a diuretic. All I do is drink coffee and water all day, so I'll be peeing all day. When I take the Kratom, I feel like I have that high sort of sensation from marijuana, but I don't get that lethargy from it. You know, I can be sustained with it. I can focus. And I'm OCD. I'm highly neurotic. I don't know if you know about, Fisk's sort of 5 personality traits, but I'm pretty highly neurotic. And so I will never let a substance kind of consume me. I'll always use it in moderation. But I do find that the Kratom is a great source of keeping you level-headed to the point where you feel focused, but you don't feel like you need more. And I feel like a lot of drug use is exacerbated by boredom. So there's this quote by Madame de Staël, and she was a French philosopher. She was a political writer from hundreds of years ago. And her most famous quote, and if you ever watch Sopranos, they talk about this, and it's the idea that one must choose between boredom and suffering. And most of the time, people that do drugs, they're bored. They don't want to be bored, you know? And I feel like a lot of us in society right now, we are engaging in social media constantly, scrolling and clicking and watching reels and stuff like that, is because we can't deal with being fucking bored. There's nothing worse than being bored right now. But in the sense that we engage in this vacuous, insipid sort of entertainment, it feels good, it's ephemeral, but in the end, it is contributing to our suffering because we're getting no real substance out of it.
Yeah.
You know?
And like I personally, you know, I've only experienced the stimulant side of Kratom. I don't think I've ever taken enough to where I felt that kind of nodded, more opioid. Like I've taken prescription opioids after I had 2 elbow surgeries, and I definitely have that noodle like I had hydrocodone, Oxycontin, maybe Vicodin. But I definitely felt that nodding off kind of
that shit
just drowsy
binds
shit.
To your opioid receptors.
Yeah, and I'm lucky because I didn't crave that. I actually, I probably took it for a few days, and I was like, I'd rather just take the extra strength Advil and go through this because I don't like feeling like a noodle. For me, I've always been more drawn to stimulants.
Yeah.
And that actually keeps me, like in a way, I don't feel the need to do more Kratom because I know doing more of it leads to it having the opposite effect of the stimulant effect.
And like a higher tolerance.
Yeah, so I'm like, all right, like this is the perfect drug for me because I don't want to take more. I want to feel awake and active when I'm taking it. And this happens to be a lower dose.
But if you look at what happened in 2018, the FDA was trying to ban it. Because anytime you come across a botanical herb that has analgesic sort of properties, Big Pharma is going to jump over that because they're like, wait a minute. You can prescribe this for multiple symptoms. Same thing with marijuana. It's like you can prescribe marijuana for, appetite, pain relief, anti-inflammatory issues. Like any sort of plant that can be prescribed to heal or abate all these sort of issues. Big Pharma is going to cause a big rouse with that. Yeah. And you saw that. They were trying to fucking get it banned.
Yeah.
And they had millions of people come out and protest. And these aren't people that are fucking crackheads. These are people that had serious injuries. And they're like, I don't want to do hard drugs. I don't want morphine. I don't want Oxycontin. I want something that I can take at a moderate dosage that's not going to make me addicted. And that's what Kratom is providing. It is helping people wean off of opioids.
That's why I made one of the video that I made on YouTube speaking about my experience, which over time has become one of the most highly viewed videos that I've made on YouTube because I've seen how hard Big Pharma is going against Kratom and how heavily people are speaking out that get a lot of benefits from it. And like they're not these fucking crackheads, like you said. They're people who take low to moderate doses, most of them. Maybe higher doses if they're managing. Like instead of taking fucking Vicodin and hydrocodone every day, they're maybe taking higher doses of Kratom because they're dealing with extreme amounts of pain. But a lot of people are in that low to moderate dose category, like myself, like yourself, and it's not this. To me, again, my experience has been it's not this sort of demonic doorway to heroin that Big Pharma wants you to believe that it is. And the World Health Organization, WHO,
which is a joke,
just decided not to call for a global Kratom ban. They were considering a global Kratom ban, like to recommend that everyone bans Kratom, and they decided not to. And a lot of it is because people spoke out and said, like, what the fuck are you doing? This drug is like less addictive than coffee, and people are getting a lot of benefits from it.
And what they want to do is all these pharmaceutical companies, they want to take kratom. They want to change a molecule. They want to brand it as something different. And then they want to charge you 4 times the price of it, you know? And it's crazy because you can see people are anti-pharma for some things. And then with other things, they're like, oh, no. Pharma's great. You know? And I'm not shitting on Western medicine because Western medicine has had some great advancements. But if you are so blinded by what their motives is, and it's all about a business, man. Like they are not conditioned. They are not trying to cure. They are trying to treat symptoms. And then once you understand that, you're just going to think pharma is like your fucking daddy. At this point.
Yeah. Instead of seeing kratom as an opportunity, the ego of pharma says, how can we cancel out every other person benefiting from this and then make our own product that only we can benefit from? There's so many ways to advocate for kratom and be creative with your own products. Just like you look at weed and CBD, how many companies have stepped in and said, all right, weed's here to stay. How can we create some sort of drink or food or some pill or extended release?
Look at weed. It is anti-inflammatory. It'll help you suppress the appetite. It will help with anxiety, depression. It has like 15 symptoms it can cure. When it comes to pharma, they want to prescribe one drug for each symptom. Yeah. So when they see something like that, they're like, oh no, we need to outlaw that because you can't prescribe one drug for all of these symptoms. Yeah. They want one drug per symptom, you know? And people are like, they have their hearts in the right place, but you've got to understand how naive some people are. Yeah. It is all about making money. That's all they give shit about.
Yeah,
they don't give a fuck about you. They just want you as a business.
And that's why psychedelics have been demonized so much because pharma's worst nightmare. If there's a drug that can alleviate your depression to the point where you don't need to take medication. Right. If pharma's worst nightmare is if you have something that you can take 3 times with therapeutic assistance and you can get rid of your fucking depression medication.
That is the worst enemy.
That's the worst enemy of pharma.
The worst thing you could hear.
They need people to be hooked to the pills so they can continue to sell them. And then they need to sell you the pills for the side effects of the pills that you're already prescribed.
But they never want to cure you. They just want to treat you.
Yeah.
Because if they cure you, they can't make any money off you.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
And kratom isn't a cure. Kratom is a way... To me, kratom, I have no kratom sponsors of the podcast or anything. I don't give a shit. I should. I'm going to reach out. And you
call it Kratom.
Kratom, yes. Yeah. I should reach out to the companies that I use. Kratom, to me, I'm telling you, and again, this is just my experience, I would have a harder time quitting kratom completely, or I'd have a harder time quitting coffee completely than I would quitting kratom.
Yeah.
Coffee has its hooks synced into me farther than kratom does. And I've gone months without kratom, but I have not gone months without coffee.
What's crazy is that coffee, caffeine, and kratom, they are both alkaloids. So they both have physiological effects.
Yeah.
They're very similar, you know?
They synergize with each other. The funny thing is, I drink less coffee because I'm taking kratom. I don't feel like I need to drink, 3 cups of coffee before noon.
Yeah.
I have the pills that have the 75 milligrams of caffeine in a serving, which is a cup of coffee. And a lot of times that's all my caffeine intake for the entire day.
So essentially you'd be purchasing less.
Exactly. And I also drink less when I'm on kratom.
We can't have that.
Yeah.
We can't have that. We need you to consume every hour of the day.
There have been weeks where I don't take kratom for the entire week, and I feel the need to I have whiskey. I enjoy whiskey. Yep. I have the globe back here that my beautiful girlfriend bought me.
Yes, shout out.
And it's great.
And the Christmas decoration.
That's from my mom.
Oh, okay. I love it.
Shout out to her. Shout out to Kathy. Yeah.
So I've noticed that you have Christmas decorations up like perfect. Like it's very subtle.
You can't see the cameras either. It's very,
I love it. It's great.
So,
I'm feeling very festive.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So there have been nights where instead of drinking the whiskey, I make a kratom tea, and I'm like I don't even feel like touching any alcohol anymore. And I have nothing against alcohol. I love having a glass of whiskey.
All for it.
You know, seltzer. I've been a seltzer slut, especially this past summer.
You are a slut.
I'm such a slutty slut. Yes. Anyway, I'm trying to recruit more Chris Cooper sluts to the cult with this podcast.
Any of my followers out there, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into Goodbye Benjamin as we end off.
Let me take a break.
Yes, 100%.
Just to go potty.
Let's do it.
Because I've had
I'll hold it for you. Okay. I'll hold it for you. Yo.
We're back.
Check.
We are back.
We are back. So, I'm going to take a sip of this LaCroix vodka.
LaCroix, very bougie.
It's actually LaCroix.
LaCroix.
So you sent me a story called Goodbye Benjamin this week, as where we to prepare for the podcast went through it. It's a microfiction 100-word story.
Yeah.
Set the scene for what happened. Can you still tell the background that led up to the story?
So, as I kind of delineated on before, like this past year, my main focus has been on my novel. But there have been some circumstances that have kind of inspired me to kind of venture outside of that, to take a break. And one of the microfiction stories I wrote was called Goodbye Benjamin. And it was based on a jarring experience that I encountered this past summer with my neighbor. He wound up committing suicide while I was home. And it was one of those instances that was kind of really caught you in your place, because I do a lot of writing with, the human condition, depression, anxiety. And this man, he was in his early 70s, and I would encounter him every single day while I was working out, and he was very pleasant. He would exchange pleasantries, with me about lifting and like, what's your workout today? Just like the nicest guy I ever met. And this past August, one Friday, I got a knock on my door, and it was about 15 police officers, and they were there to check on a suicide call. And I'm like, no, you've got the wrong place. And they're like, oh, well, we're looking for one, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, that's downstairs. So they, stormed off, went downstairs. And about 5 minutes later, I took my dog out, and I came outside, and there was just this onslaught of police presence. And I saw the wife there that I see every day. And she looked like a deer in the headlights, and she had this indelible sort of expression on her face where her eyes are wide, and it looks like the lights were on, but nobody's home. She was surrounded by police officers. And I approached her and I just said, hey, like, are you okay? What's going on? And she's like, I don't know. My husband might have hurt himself. And I'm like, is he okay? And she, she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm here if you ever need me. I do have a soft spot in my heart for older people, just because my parents are older, and I understand when you get to that certain point in your life, you're not as autonomous, and you do tend to rely on the people around you. And just to see somebody like that was just completely heartbreaking. And you come to find out that her husband wound up committing suicide that day. He was about 72 years old. He was a professional pool player. He couldn't partake in his hobby. He couldn't hold a pool stick anymore. He had colon cancer. He had undergone about 50 sessions of chemotherapy. And you never would have known that from talking to him. He was always lighthearted. He was always just this nice guy. And he would always pull up every day at 5 o'clock while I was working out and just saying like, what's the workout today? Like, what are you doing? You know? And we would always exchange pleasantries, but I never sensed that he was, you know, barely holding out. He was just had this convivial sort of attitude where you wanted to talk to him, you wanted to share. And one day he just fucking blows his brains out next door to me. And I had written a microfiction short story about it. And it's tough not to take that stuff to heart, just because I knew him. You know, I saw him every day, and I would always talk to him, whether it was, you know, surface level stuff or you know, he would disclose on his past. But when it happened, I really took it to heart, because, you know, I do deal with anxiety, depression, and I found a way to kind of channel that into productive avenues. But to see somebody that it's overwhelming and it eventually, you know, you succumb to it, it really kind of strikes a chord with me. So I wrote a short story about it, 100 words, just because I was still working on my novel, and I submitted it to a publisher, and the publisher got back to me and said, "This is beautifully written. We love it, but the ending is not realistic."
Yeah, I wrote down the quote. They said it's, quote, "just not believable."
Yeah.
And then what did you write back?
And like, I read something like that and I'm like, you know what? You're a motherfucker. I'm like, this is verbatim what happened. Yeah. I'm like, it's not believable. So I just wrote back, listen. And they were like, can you possibly change the ending or the reason why he committed suicide? And I just wrote back, listen, man, I wish I didn't have to even write this story. I wish I could change it all. But I'm like, this is what happened verbatim. So I'm not changing it. And if you don't want it, that's fine. I'll pitch it to other publishers. And their response was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, we'll take it. They doubled the compensation for it. But then they were like, oh, you know, we can't publish it till next year because our magazine is backed up. So I was like, you know what? That's your prerogative, but I'm still going to publish it. I'm still going to pitch it to other magazines. And then before I know it, they respond and they're like, oh, no. We'll take it. We'll swap somebody out and we'll publish it in April. So, and that's sort of a microcosm for what I'm doing with my stories. Like, I am bringing authenticity to these stories. A lot of the stuff you read nowadays, they start out a certain way, but then they're wrapped up in a beautiful bow and they're delivered to you and they make you feel really great and you can go off and make a fucking snow angel outside. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to give you the firsthand account of the human experience. And I'm not saying it has to be depressive at all times, but a lot of reality relies in your perspective and how you look at things. And this is one of those stories that is severely dark and it doesn't really have an uplifting end there, but it's a part of life and it happens. And, you know, these suicide ideations will find people that are, you know, susceptible to these sort of ideologies, but it's not something that you should frown upon. It's something that you should explore and to really kind of, you know, look into. A lot of people that have reached out to me over the year about anxiety and depression, they're like, well, you know, how do I make it stop? And what do I do? And it's like, no, you're not getting it. It's not about making it stop. It's about understanding where it's coming from. It's about understanding yourself. And Soren Kierkegaard, who's a Danish philosopher from 300 years ago, you know, he proclaimed that depression and anxiety isn't an ailment. It's more of a spiritual journey. And I think if people can realize that this unsettledness in your chest, this thrownness into the world isn't an ailment, it's more of a call to seek inspiration, to kind of understand yourself and to look inward and not so much outward, not to seek a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a job or a vocation or, a salary, but to see what's internal. And a lot of people are afraid to look inside and see what's really lingering inside. And that's something that I highly recommend you take your time to really explore. And it's something that a lot of people are not prepared to do.
Yeah. With the publication's recommendation to make it more believable, there is a humorous aspect to it where you witness, or not witness, but eventually you weren't actually there, but you learn that your neighbor literally shot himself in the face. That was how he did it, right?
Yep.
And then you write a story about that actual experience, the actual thing that happened, and the magazine emails you back and they're like, I like this story, but I just, there's something about it. Just seems like a little bit made up. Can
melodramatic.
Can we jazz this up a little bit? Can we combine that, but like the ending of Elf where he reunites with his family or something, like, to me, just, and you emailed them back and you're literally just like, my neighbor blew his head off. This is a real story.
This is verbatim what happened. Yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry it's not believable for you, but this literally fucking happened.
I'm wondering, like, what is not believable about someone committing suicide? I don't know. That happens literally every day, hundreds, thousands of times, every single day. Someone chooses to end their own life, and the magazine editor's like, I don't believe someone would actually do that.
I do think that we're in a generation now where suicide is kind of, and mental health is kind of like a cool sort of topic. Like if you go on Instagram, you'll see people posting about ways to like combat your anxiety and depression. And it's kind of saturated with, virtue signaling and like, look at me, like I'm sad, but I'm dealing with it. But in all honesty, and I'm not trying to shit on people, but the people that are really suffering from this stuff are not the people that are posting for sympathy. They're the people that are laughing. They're the people that are trying to create a facade of happiness. Yeah. And I think that we need to stop trying to, we got past the, stigmatizing mental health, but I think we're getting to a point where it's just like, that's the cool thing now.
It's becoming a badge of honor.
Yeah. Like it's people trendy.
Yeah. It's like trendy to be the depressed, anxious artist and post about how depressed and anxious you are and getting through it. And at a certain point, I enjoy a lot of different types of music from a lot of different types of artists. And there are some artists where I question, are you depressed or are you using this as an avenue to reach people through Spotify or SoundCloud or whatever? Are you basically like streaming your depression for numbers essentially? Because sometimes that's what it feels like. I'm like, people that are really suffering from that, and there are a lot of artists that do suffer from that, and I know people well that suffer from that, even in my own family, and it's not this. Like when you are suffering from depression, you're not thinking about how to leverage it into more downloads or streams or things like that. It's a lot of times it's the people who are the happiest or the calmest or the most peaceful, and because they're projecting it in ways that aren't monetizable, or they're not trying to monetize it. Yeah, and they're these. Yeah, it really has become this sort of social status of, are you even an artist if you're not rapping or writing about your depression? Yeah.
No, I agree 100%,
Is this is a question I have for you is, did the experience of your neighbor killing himself and shooting himself, did that make you hyper aware of your own ability to do that if you chose to? Because I have watched documentaries and I've listened to people who have witnessed suicides, either on podcasts or people I've had on the podcast who have experience with people in their own family committing suicide or close friends, and the knowledge of the knowledge and the experience of hearing about suicide makes me anxious, because I think about all the ways in which, if I wanted to, I could do that. And there are moments where I'm hyper aware of like, oh my God, like I could jump out my window, or I have a lot of sharp objects in my apartment. Like, what if I just fucking lose my mind for 30 seconds and decide to do something terrible?
Yeah.
And I get 100%. Caught in this loop, especially when I was quarantining by myself in the height of the pandemic. There were nights where I would go to bed and I would be lying in my bed thinking, like, what if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I just fucking like do something to myself? You
look at any brilliant creative minds, they've all, and like as shitty as this is to admit, they've all ended their lives on their own accord. Ernest Hemingway put a shotgun in his mouth, blew his fucking head off, right? Hunter S. Thompson blew his fucking head off, right? Virginia Woolf put her head in a fucking oven. Stevie Smith fucking drowned herself.
Virginia Woolf put her head in an oven?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. To inhale monoxide. Yeah, poisoning. So it's like...
But what is that though? Because there are also creative geniuses that are still alive and kicking and find out a way to combat that with something.
The problem is that if you are too inclined, if you're too familiar with the human condition, and it goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche, and Friedrich Nietzsche's most famous quote is, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," right? And fucking Kelly Clarkson has made a song out of it, right? But I doubt Kelly...
What makes you stronger?
Exactly.
Last a little longer.
And Kelly Clarkson, not exactly a nihilist, just like female empowerment.
She could be, though. She's an example of someone like, God forbid if Kelly Clarkson ended her life. Like, that would be an example of someone who's like, you never saw it coming. It's not part of her brand to be
like,
depressed.
If you think about these minds, man, you have Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most iconic philosophers, Vincent van Gogh, one of the most iconic painters. None of them achieved success during their lifetimes.
Yeah, Vincent van Gogh sold one painting during his life.
And it's scary because for me, and I'm not saying like I'm on track to be a fucking iconic author, but for that shit to happen next door, it's just, you're flanked by it. Yeah. You can't escape it.
Yeah.
It's around you at all times. And this guy and I don't even want to say his name, but for him every day to seek me out, to have a conversation, to talk to me, the most uplifting guy, full of energy, for this guy to pull the fucking trigger on himself, it's like, how does any of us stand a chance?
Well, he could have still been that same uplifting, happy-go-lucky guy.
Yeah.
And a 5-minute dark spiral in his life that he may have not been equipped to deal with led him to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But
it's a permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Yeah.
But it has such a significant impact.
Yeah.
I mean, he was married. He's got a wife. It's a widow now.
Yeah.
They're in their 70s.
Well, what was the quote you said by Hemingway about the bleeding in the beginning?
There's nothing to it about writing. You just have to sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Okay, so if you take that to the ultimate fulfillment, if you view creativity as you bleeding slowly out over the course of your life, the ultimate way to fulfill that is once you've had your creative climax, you're bled out completely. You kill yourself because there's nothing better for you to do. But there are also examples of people that have been creative geniuses that are great writers, artists, producers, whatever, that have another view of creativity, which is that everything you create breathes life into you and other people. Like, it gives you a reason to keep going.
Yeah.
There's suffering involved, but it's not just bleeding. It's suffering that builds you up into a state that's more powerful and sensitive and better than you were before that creation, and then you continue to build on that.
Yeah.
And so I think it doesn't have to end. It doesn't have to end like that. There are other ways to think about creativity besides just slowly bleeding yourself out into the world.
But on the contrary, if you can reduce your happiness to a hedonic treadmill, your desires to mimetic desire, you are literally, you can tell that you're not unique, you're not special. You're literally just recycled stimuli, reacting to stimuli. How do you not invoke a perennial sense of nihilism that everything is fucking meaningless, you know?
Isn't that a relief though? Because when I think about that, you could either say everything is fucking meaningless. Fuck this. Or you're like, everything's fucking meaningless. Like,
so
who
gives
gives
a
a
shit?
fuck?
Exactly.
And you
that's
flip
the absurdism.
that. Yeah.
That's absurdism.
Yeah. And like you let that empower you. And something like, Van Gogh selling one painting in his life, to me, that's inspiring because I'm like, if Van Gogh sold one fucking painting in his life, how lucky am I if I sell a fucking podcast?
Well, isn't that the thing, man?
Yeah.
Van Gogh, the most iconic painter of history.
Yeah, there's a museum of him in every country on the planet.
Fucking Edgar Allan Poe died in debt. When he fucking died, people came and they fucking stole his shit because he owed them money.
Yeah.
Like, these are prolific artists in our history that we look up to, and they all went to their grave thinking they're fucking failures, man.
Yeah.
Like, crazy, Yeah. Crazy shit.
Yeah. Finding inspiration in the meaninglessness of things.
Yeah.
I feel like after our conversation and also looking into things like mimetic desire and just like I've definitely had a more absurdist spin to my life after our conversation, and then also the pandemic, where I'm like, what the fuck is the point to all this? I'm chasing something. I'm here for literally a blink of an eye.
Yep.
No one's gonna give a fuck about the most iconic, famous person from my generation is going to be forgotten in 100 years.
Exactly.
So why the fuck am I worried if I don't reach a stage in my life? Why not just enjoy shit? And I've had a lot easier time dropping the shit more quickly that I don't enjoy, because I'm more about, if this isn't fulfilling to me now, I don't want to do it. And that doesn't mean I don't suffer. I think a big part of the creative process is suffering to get through the celebration of making shit and putting it out into the world.
Well, you talked about stoicism before.
Yeah.
Right? One of the most profound stoicists is Seneca. And one of his, most iconic quotes is that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. And it's so true. I mean, if we wake up every day, we obsess about something, some sort of, permutation that can happen, some sort of circumstance that can happen. And majority of the time, that shit doesn't materialize. But we've still suffered through the possibility of it happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest part of that for me is I always have conversations in my head before they happen in real life. And then I suffer because I project those outcomes of the conversation, the imagined outcomes of conversations, into my present day. Yeah. The imagined outcomes of future conversations into what I'm doing right now. And meditation has been part of this, but I recognize those thoughts and I'm like, oh my God, my day, half of my day has been shitty. I've had this overcastness to my day because I imagined some bullshit conversation in my head in the morning that hasn't actually happened yet. I just assumed the person felt this way. Yeah.
Hypothetical.
I just assumed the person was going to react this way. I assumed this thing about an opportunity, and I pulled on that fucking cloud of darkness that was imagined, and I made it real by having it affect what I'm actually doing. And I fucking sometimes I snap myself out of it. There are other times where it takes me hours or days to realize that I've been living in this fucking imagined fog of darkness. And it's the quote wild. Seneca, it's this imagined suffering that I'm putting myself through for no reason.
Crazy, you know? And if we could be cognizant of that, our lives would be so much better.
Yeah.
Know?
So speaking of suffering, Black people, let's get into...
Yes.
Let's get into... This will make sense. There was a magazine that you sent me a screenshot of one of the payment requirements, or kind of like the payment procedure of this magazine. Joyland magazine, yes. Yeah. We'll say it. It's on their page. It's public.
Yeah. So seriously. Yeah. You've got to shed light.
So Joyland magazine,
which is like one of the top 10 magazines in all of the USA.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So Joyland magazine has this payment procedure listed on their website. So it's not like we're exposing a private conversation. Like this is literally, if you go to submit a story as a writer, this is what you see. And it says, this project charges fees, parentheses, or requires purchases for some submissions. They charge fees for all people who are Black. Or they charge fees for all people except who are Black.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. So basically, Joyland magazine has fee submissions across the board. And then
unless you're Black,
and they don't charge people who are Black writers who are submitting. So, which I was like, this is that's so racist. That's so much more racist than charging Black people.
Subliminal racism.
Yeah, because it's like saying
you are too poor.
Yeah, we don't even need to ask for your income statement. We know you can't afford to submit your story to this magazine because you're Black.
And listen, like, you have the best intentions, but something like that is so patronizing for somebody that's a person of color, where I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, I must be too poor that I can't pay you $3 to read this.
Yeah.
And like I said, you have the best intentions, but this sort of shit is just, it's counterproductive. It really is. And the fact that you're then saying that regardless of the story content, its merit is based on the color of the skin of the author. It's so problematic.
Yeah.
You know, and as a writer, I'm like, sure, like, then this isn't the magazine for me. Obviously, I don't fit your desired criteria. But
so you checked off Black on the box so you could save a few bucks.
Well, I'm like, then how do you gauge? Like, what happens if I'm 25% African American? Can I send you a DNA test? Like, I just, like, stuff like this is not conducive to making things better. This is separating writers further. It's more decisive than anything, you know? And seeing something like that on the top 10 magazine, it's just like, how do you not take that as like some form of subliminal racism?
Yeah.
You know?
If you're a magazine or some institution that charges fees for everyone except Black people, you're basically saying that we don't even have to ask for your level of income or tax bracket, whatever you want to do. We know this will help you out.
Yeah.
Because we're flagellating ourselves to have less money so that we can show you how anti-racist we are, when in actuality this is like why not do it by tax bracket? Why not say you don't if you make less than 30K a year, just send us a screenshot of your last income statement, like your tax from last year, your tax statement from last year, and we will waive the fee.
My main question is does a story improve in terms of its quality based on the color of the skin of the author?
Does the story improve in its quality based on the color of the skin of the author?
Yeah. Like if you have the same story and first you're saying, all right, this is a white author, and they read it, and then the next person says, well, this is a black author. Does the quality of the story improve if it's from a different skin color?
I don't think if you have the same story, if you're trying to tell the same story, the same experience, if a white person and a black person experience the same thing and they have similar backgrounds, similar family situations, because to me it's all the experience. It's not what color it's the experience that led up to it. What was your home situation like? Where'd you grow up? Were your parents like what led up to that experience? And how can you write about it based on your past experiences? So if you take two people who are very similar and had similar backgrounds, similar family situations, and they write a story, one's white, one's black, I don't think it changes all that much. But if you have two people who had different experiences growing up, where one person was from a poor neighborhood, maybe grew up with a single mom, that gives you the ability to write about different things. So the story would be different to start off with. So you couldn't even write the same story as that person.
Yeah.
But
my question is that if you have the same story, is it more appealing if the author is white or if the author is non-white?
Is it more appealing to the reader or the magazine?
Both.
I mean, I don't think it's
right.
I don't think it's any more or less to me. I don't. First of all, if I'm buying a book or I'm reading something,
is that like a contingency where you're like, I only want to
unless someone
I'm only going to be fascinated with stories
unless someone has a name that's like obviously of African descent where I know this person is black based on their name. I don't know if someone is named like John Edwards, if that person is white or black. If I look at the book cover and I see that picture of that person, which I never do because I just click the buy button on Amazon because it's so easy. I don't give a shit about the race of the person buying the book. Maybe the book has a racial context to it, so just based on the summary of the book, I know that it's a black or white or Indian or Asian person writing it. But 95% of the time, the person's race who is writing a book or short story doesn't even enter my mind. I'm just like,
that's the point.
This seems like an interesting concept of a story. If it's part of the story, maybe I find out the protagonist or the author is of a certain race. But other than that, I don't give a shit. All I give a shit is about is it a good story?
Quality. The quality of content.
And with that being said, there are some stories that people of different backgrounds can tell because they may be treated a certain way by police or by institutions, whatever. Like if a black guy was pulled over and treated like shit down south by a cop, or like a Jewish guy was pulled over in a town in bumfuck nowhere and was treated like shit by a cop, like they may be of a certain background or skin color where they are telling a story that unites people and is a common experience of other people who are also of that skin color or background. But that doesn't make the story good. That just gives you a starting point of the experience, and then your ability to write about it and craft the narrative and tell that story will be the difference maker. Because those are the stories that last. Like your background may put you in a position, and your skin color may put you in a position, your religion may put you in a position to have an experience that other people may not have, but then you still need the skill and the creativity and the discipline to craft that into a story that other people want to read. If that makes sense.
Fair enough.
And that's just different from person to person. Like every person has only certain stories that they can tell well. They can write certain things.
I gotta put money in the meter.
Okay, go do it. All right, so to end off, I wanted to get into this rejection that you sent me, a rejection from a magazine, because I thought this was actually very funny when I read it. So I feel like we should end on a light note.
Okay.
This rejection from a magazine on the annual memorandum on mortality,
which is I just finished this short story, probably mid-November, and I pitched it to about 15 magazines, and this is the first magazine that got back to me. So it's still in the work. It'll probably be my last short story before my debut novel is published.
So this is the rejection word for word from the magazine.
Yeah.
He wrote, because it was a guy's name. I'm not assuming that. I'm not assuming. I would never assume gender on this podcast.
Exactly.
He writes, quote, "I had the opportunity to read an annual memorandum on mortality, and I really enjoyed this piece, especially the clever symbolism and the floating narration. Unfortunately, this story may be a little too subliminal / smart for the clientele that frequent this publication. Sorry to decline, just not a right fit for this magazine." And he by rejecting this piece, by calling it too smart and subliminal, he's basically calling the readers of his magazine imbeciles, dumb pieces of shit that can't understand writing from. And yes, you do use a lot of symbolism, but if I can read stories like Finn almost buys a goldfish or Bleed and understand what's going on in the story and get a lot of meaning out of it, then other people can do it too. I'm not a professional writer. I fucking picture books make me feel at home. So if I can understand something, then chances are other people can understand it too. And I get a lot of meaning and inspiration and fulfillment out of what you write. And so it's like this guy is projecting his own misunderstanding of the story or inability to understand the story onto his readers. Like maybe he's dumber than his readers.
Yeah, which is, I mean, listen, anytime you can get a personalized rejection letter, you made an impact with that publication or editor. In this case,
it was me, by the way. I didn't mean to reject it.
I mean,
just slipped out.
And in this case, he indirectly insults his readers by being "quote unquote" too stupid to kind of understand the story. Yeah,
basically, it says, "I'm sorry, Chris. Our readers are not intelligent enough to understand this story. Yeah. Unfortunately, you're going to have to write something with pictures next time so that our readers will be able to understand what's going on."
Yeah, exactly. And I want to take this time to apologize for my stellar intellect. I didn't mean to oppress anybody.
Yeah. I feel oppressed during this podcast and the last one too.
But this story, the annual memorandum on mortality, is really a satirical realist read. And it's my longest short story. It's about 5,000 words. And it'll get it picked up by a publication that realizes its potential. And so I'm not worried about that. But the annual memorandum on mortality is a very technical term to just kind of reference someone's birthday. An annual memorandum, so a yearly reminder that you're going to die. And that's pretty much your birthday. Every year you are reminded that you're one step closer to death. And this story, once it gets published, I'm sure it'll be published in the next couple months. I sent it out to a couple different magazines, but it's a very clever way of exploring what it's like to get older once you're past 21 and the abundance of Facebook messages you receive, wishing you a happy birthday, and the new sort of evolution of life once you get into your 40s, and what your birthdays are like. Obviously your momentous birthdays are, when you're 18 or you're 21 or you're 25, or you can drink or you can drive, drink, and rent a car. But after that, your birthdays are kind of just an amalgamation of all one birthday, and it kind of loses its significance. And this story is kind of a satirical read on that. And there's a lot of subliminal messaging there. And it's something that my audience or my followers can look forward to once it gets published. But at this point, it's deemed a little too smart.
Yeah, you're going to have to dumb it down a little bit for readers like myself and listeners of the podcast.
And honestly, that's the best kind of rejection letter you can get. Sorry, this is just too smart for our readers. So
yeah, it's like getting rejected by an Ivy League school, and they're like, I'm sorry, you're just too intimidating. Your intelligence is intimidating to our student body, except this is not an Ivy League publication. They're just like,
exactly.
So my thing is, Bleed has a lot of subliminal messaging in it, and there's the obvious symbol of the blood, but then there's all the deeper symbols and context that we talked about that you can dive into, and you can enjoy a story like Bleed. And I'm sure the annual memorandum on mortality is similar in the sense where you can enjoy it on the surface level, and it's almost like a choose your own adventure to how deep you want to take the story.
Exactly.
Like different people will end up in different layers of the story, and it's not necessarily a mark on your intelligence because you got to this level of understanding. Maybe some people will take it to points that you didn't even realize were there because something happened in their own life that you haven't experienced, and they were like, oh, this made me, this symbol, I took this symbol away from Bleed, or this meaning away from Bleed, and that applies to my own life. And you're like, yeah, fucking go with that. I didn't even know I was writing about that, but if that means that to you, then take it and run with it. And people, and you have your own meanings behind stories when you're writing them. Absolutely. And not everyone that reads it will tap into that meaning. But that's also the beauty of putting something out into the world, that 1,000 people will read the story that you write, and they will be taken 1,000 different ways. And each person, based on their own biology and experiences, is finding a slice of meaning and then choosing how far they want to think about it or not think about it. Or, they read a story like Bleed or annual memorandum on mortality when it comes out. Maybe they read that in January of 2022, and then 6 months later they read it again and they take something away from it that they didn't take away the first time, or something happens to them in their life and they're like, oh fuck, like this reminds me of that story, I need to go back and read it again. So there's so many layers of it.
But this is a pervasive sort of element of the industry where they are, in not so many words, but they are kind of condescending towards their readers, where they're like, this is too above their heads. Like, they're not going to get it, And what kind of service does that do to your readers, And listen, this is just one magazine. Like, it's going to get published in the next couple of months. But it's just shocking that they are indulging in some semblance of censorship, like verbatim. They're like, we like this story, but it's too smart. So therefore we're going to shelter our readers from this, And how can you grow from that if you're being constantly sheltered from something that's a little more intellectually stimulating? Like that sort of stuff just really flusters me.
Maybe the guy who wrote this response in the email calling it too smart or too subliminal wanted to be a writer himself.
I guess so, yeah.
And or just, maybe he felt threatened by the writing, because this does happen. Like people will encounter other creative works and they wish that they created it themselves, or maybe they feel threatened by the level that it gets to, or how good it is, and they're like, there's no way that our readers are going to get this, because if it's over my head, then there's no way anyone else is going to be able to understand this or contextualize this.
There's a lot of ego that goes into today's society, and it's not just publishing. It's and Ernest Becker talks about this. This is that our ego is something that we created to help identify ourselves, but it also helps us develop a defense mechanism, like where we get these sort of invasive thoughts, and where like we separate ourselves from these thoughts. We're like, this isn't a part of us. But if you go into Buddhism sort of mentality, the ultimate sense of enlightenment is the death of the ego. It depends on how deep you want to get. But as a writer, I can advocate that the best way to get in tune with yourself and others is to experience this ego death, where we don't identify ourselves. Like, I don't identify myself as a writer. I'm an author. I have these certain things that identify myself. That sets up boundaries in a sense, and once we're able to kind of kill the ego, we can kind of experience these connections that are a little more authentic than where we put up these boundaries where, like, hypothetically, I'm the writer, so if you disagree with my writing style, that just means that you're not so, acclimated with writing per se, and, these are timeless motifs that Freud kind of talked about, but we are constantly working on now, and it is a constant sort of issue with our society, with social media, how meretricious it is, where we are uploading our best post, our best selfie. We are trying to really kind of provide ancillary support for our ego, and we are closely venturing away from where we need to be with the social media. And that's like, a discussion you can have, for an hour or so. But what it comes down to is just being perfectly okay with who you are as a person, and not trying to put on a presentation or a facade of, how you want to be perceived.
Yes. Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end off for this round of the podcast.
Absolutely.
And I want to let you know and let my listeners know that even though this podcast is too smart and subliminal for myself and my audience, I'm going to release it anyway, because I trust my audience. I trust my dumb fucking audience like me. Like we're in this together. It's just people that are trying to be a little less dumb every day.
Yep.
To get through this podcast and find fulfillment. And I enjoy talking to you every time. This is fucking awesome, and
it's natural.
I appreciate it.
And
it's natural. Yes.
Yeah. It's not forced.
So plug everything again that people can check out, even if it's stories from last time, because people may be listening to this conversation first. There is Chris Cooper round 1. You can search Chris Cooper Auxoro wherever you listen to podcasts. I wore
a different color blazer.
Yes. It was lighter.
It was lighter. This one is more indicative of my inherent darkness.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, be on the lookout. Listen, like, I get so many messages every day from magazines and publishers and fans, and like, I'm working on the novel. The novel should be pitched by the end of the year. I have another short story that we kind of talked about, the annual memorandum on mortality. I'm pitching that to magazines. Maybe I'll pitch it to you. It'll be out there soon.
You'll pitch it to me?
I'll pitch it to you.
For what?
If you want to release it.
You would let me release a story?
Yeah, if you want to, man.
Auxoro?
Yeah.
I would love to, yeah.
If you want to, man. I mean, honestly, at this point, the bullshit that I've experienced in the publishing industry, I'm just like, you know what? It's so like over the top and just so pompous where I'm like, anybody that has the stomach to release this stuff is where I want to be at. You know, like I don't enjoy indulging in the politics of this industry. Yeah. It is the most discouraging aspect of it. So, you know, like I've sent my story out to a couple of publications, but in the end, if they find that it's not like, you know, it's too intellectually stimulating, you know, then maybe I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I would love to. The deal is, though, even though I'm going to publish the story on Auxoro, I still get to write a rejection letter. I still want the satisfaction of rejecting you, just writing the words to just pierce you. I want to get you somehow through rejection, and then we can read it on round 3.
Well, you should reject me solely based on my skin color.
Yes.
That's what you should do.
Yeah. Yes. Well, because you're white, I'm going to waive the submission fee. Usually it's a few grand. I'm going to waive that for you.
Okay. That's my white privilege.
Yes, because you're white privilege. And so, yeah, I would be an honor. I love it. So there's Bleed. People will check out Bleed.
You got to check out
Bleed. And I'll link
Bleed.
all this in the podcast on YouTube or
Finn almost buys Goldfish. We can send you that one.
Bleed. And there was another one?
Calvin Klein,
yes.
Calvin Klein has got the comment section disabled.
Yeah, go read that. People can't comment anymore. Literally, the comment section got too wild on Calvin Klein.
Yeah, I got people a little fired up there, but it's. Listen, I am literally. If you want to put me into a box, because that's what the society does, is we want to kind of give labels to, you know, I'm in this box where I want you to start asking questions, and dialectics is a lost art, and it's the form of asking questions to get down to objective truths. And if you read my stories, you're going to get authentic stories. You're not going to get these stories that are wrapped up in bows and happy ever after endings. So, you know, obviously I have a good following here, but if you want to indulge and join upon, you know, I have a link to all my stories in my Instagram bio where you can access them.
What's your Instagram?
So my Instagram is CoopD88. And if you click my link in my bio, you can access all my stories.
Oh, yeah.
I have Descent, I have The Swim, I have The Eulogy, I have Finn Almost Buys a Goldfish, I have Bleed. And you can see the progression between these stories. You can see, you know, what has caused a rise in the people that read it and the commentator. You know, that people are constantly, you know, leaving comments on. You know, I recommend you just immersing yourself in the literature here, because it's not just one-sided. It's highly ambiguous, and depending on your sort of disposition, you can kind of identify with a certain aspect with it. So please, you know, proceed to check out my stories, and, you know, don't feel like if you're questioning yourself, that's a bad thing. Like, that's what I'm trying to get you to do. Like, I want you to question existence. Like, there is no reason that Aristotle from thousands of years ago, his sort of discussions are still relevant today without the constant questions. Like, you cannot pigeon yourself into just believing whatever fucking 7 headline words that you read, you know? You've got to challenge yourself into reading stuff.
Well, Chris Cooper, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely, Zach. It's been a privilege, man.
Let's go eat some more food and drink some more
charcuterie.
Drinks.
Yes.
Go get some more charcuterie. and
shout out to David Robinson, who is not really a Spartan. He could not make the 101 mile trek to up here.
Yeah, no, next time. We will definitely do a podcast with Chris Cooper and Dave Robinson in the future. That shit will happen. But yeah, thank you, Chris. Go check out Chris's story again.
Yeah.
Link in his bio on Instagram, which I'll have wherever you're listening to this or watching this. And then Spank the CARP, Fiction and Poetry 2020 Anthology, available at Barnes & Noble.
Emerging Writers Award.
Yes, Emerging Writers Award.
Yes.
And you can check out Finn Almost Buys a Goldfish is in here.
Yes.
And yeah, thanks again. This is fucking awesome.
You're the man, Zach.
I'll see you in
2022. 2022. If I'm still around, man.
Yeah, me too. Me too. You can take over the podcast.